Section 1. The Secret Life of Springfield's Background Characters. Let's start somewhere most people never look. Not at Homer, not at Bart, not at the storylines you've already rewatched a dozen times while the room got dark and the night settled in around you. Let's start at the edges of the frame. The far corners of Springfield where the camera never quite focuses, where the animators placed figures who were never meant to be examined too closely, who were never supposed to matter, who drifted through the background of someone else's story without names or histories or reasons for being there at all. Except slowly, across years and then decades, some of them became more than background. They accumulated detail. They appeared again and again in scenes where their presence wasn't strictly required. They started to have expressions that didn't quite match the joke in the foreground, behaviors that didn't quite fit the scene around them, histories that crept out sideways, through lines of dialogue that arrived and then evaporated before the audience could hold on to them. Springfield's background characters are the show's secret nervous system, and once you start paying attention to them, you realize the show has been quietly constructing entire interior lives for people who were never supposed to have any. So settle in. Get comfortable wherever you are. Let the sounds of an episode playing somewhere in the background fade to comfortable noise the way they're supposed to, and let's walk through Springfield's crowd together and look at who's actually standing there. There is a man named Arnie Pye standing at a news desk every time something important happens in Springfield. He is KBBL's traffic reporter. He appears in aerial shots over accidents and disasters, his voice coming through the radio like weather, like something that's just always on in the background of every room in every house in town. Most viewers know his name, if they know it at all, because he occasionally appears to argue with Kent Brockman, Springfield's main news anchor. These arguments are played as comic relief. Arnie is the lesser journalist, perpetually overshadowed, perpetually dismissed, perpetually framed as the smaller presence in every room he occupies. He exists in the show's social hierarchy as someone who is allowed to be present but not allowed to matter. But here is what's strange about Arnie Pye. He is almost always right. In episode after episode, Arnie's traffic reports are accurate. His aerial perspective gives him the clearest view of whatever catastrophe Springfield is currently experiencing. He is overhead during the monorail incident. He is overhead during flood events and environmental disasters. He is overhead in various forms when the dome comes down in the Simpsons movie and when Burns-related crises reshape the town's landscape. Arnie Pye has the highest vantage point in Springfield, and from up there, he can see everything that everyone on the ground is missing or choosing not to see. And nobody listens to him. Kent Brockman cuts him off with the practiced ease of someone who has been cutting the same person off for decades. The newsroom ignores his feeds when they become inconvenient. The audience inside the show treats his reports as transitions, as the sound you hear while you're waiting for the actual news to resume. Arnie Pye exists in a permanent state of seeing the whole picture from above, while everyone below him refuses to look up long enough to receive what he is sending them. There is a reading of Arnie Pye that is genuinely melancholic once you sit with it through enough episodes. He is the journalist who has the story but cannot get anyone to print it, cannot get anyone to care that he has it, cannot find a way to make his elevation into influence. He has been circling over Springfield's disasters for 3 decades, with a camera pointed at the truth, and the truth has never once made the evening lead because Kent Brockman is talking about something else, or because the newsroom has already decided what story it is telling tonight. Under the radiation theory that runs through so much of the show's hidden architecture, Arnie's position takes on a specific weight. He is the one character who is literally above the contamination zone for much of his working life. He flies over Springfield rather than living inside it the way everyone else does. His perspective is cleaner, less filtered through whatever the ground-level environment is doing to the people breathing the air and drinking the water down below. And what he does with that cleaner perspective is report. He describes what he sees. He tells the truth about the shape of events as they appear from altitude. He is the show's figure of objective observation, positioned where objectivity is actually possible, and the show places him there and then demonstrates, week after week, that Springfield has no institutional mechanism for receiving what he offers. His persistent, futile witness is one of the show's most quietly sustained character studies. He has been trying to tell Springfield what he can see since the beginning. Springfield has been not listening with equal consistency, and neither of them at this point seems particularly surprised by the other's behavior. They have been in this dynamic so long it has become something like a relationship, an unsatisfying one, but a relationship nonetheless. Professor John Nerdlebaum Frink Jr. is the other character who knows too much and has nowhere sufficient to put the knowing. He exists in Springfield as a punchline about science. He speaks in a distinctive, convoluted vocal pattern. He invents devices that malfunction spectacularly and publicly. He is treated by the narrative as the show's resident genius who somehow never makes anything work correctly, whose intelligence cannot be converted into useful outcome, whose presence in a situation tends to make things more complicated rather than less. Except that is not quite accurate, and the show knows it. Professor Frink's inventions almost always work. The malfunction is rarely in the invention itself. The malfunction is almost always in how the invention interacts with Springfield's specific environment, or with Springfield's specific residents, or with the particular combination of chaos and incompetence and active sabotage that surrounds every public demonstration of technology in this town. His hovercar functioned perfectly. The problem was Homer's relationship with operating anything mechanical. His teleporter functioned according to its design parameters. The problem was the people using it, and the specific ways in which their bodies and intentions introduced variables the design had not accounted for. His hamster-powered vehicle was a genuine engineering achievement. The problem was the hamster, and more specifically, the problem was everything about Springfield's relationship with both hamsters and vehicular transportation. Frink is a brilliant scientist working in conditions that make brilliance structurally impossible to demonstrate to any useful effect. He is surrounded by people who do not understand what he has built, deploying technology into situations that are too chaotic for any controlled outcome, and presenting his work to an audience that processes complexity as noise and novelty as threat. He is the show's figure of intellectual achievement trapped in a community of intellectual incapacity, and the comedy of his situation is the comedy of the wrong person in the wrong place, sustained across 36 years. Now consider this from a different angle. Frink is aware of what the power plant is doing to Springfield. He must be. He is a scientist with advanced degrees in multiple fields, presumably possessing the capacity to measure things like radiation output, water contamination levels, the correlation between environmental exposure and observable biological mutation. He lives in the same town as Blinky, the three-eyed fish. He exists in a community where the environmental evidence of nuclear contamination is visible, literal, swimming in the local waterways, and glowing faintly in certain corridors of the plant's basement. And yet Frink never directly confronts Burns about any of this. He never publishes findings that implicate the plant. He never appears before a municipal council with data about the relationship between the plant's emissions and the population's observable physical characteristics. He never writes the paper that would force the conversation Springfield has been avoiding for decades. The question is why, and the show never answers it directly. One possibility is that Frink has tried. That somewhere in the vast background of Springfield's civic life, somewhere in the unaired history between episodes, Frink prepared the reports and filed the papers and requested the meetings, and was consistently ignored or overruled by the economic and political machinery that Burns controls. That his silence on the topic now is not ignorance or cowardice, but exhaustion. The resignation of someone who understood the problem with perfect clarity, attempted to address it through every legitimate channel available, and found those channels entirely and systematically blocked. Another possibility is darker and more uncomfortable. That Frink knows, and that his continued residence in Springfield and his continued employment in what amounts to the town's scientific infrastructure means he is, at some level, complicit in the system he understands better than anyone. That his spectacular and publicly ineffective inventions are a form of performance, a way of making himself visibly useful and visibly harmless, a way of ensuring that nobody asks him to turn his analytical tools toward the more uncomfortable measurements. A scientist who could prove that Burns's plant is mutating the town's population would be very dangerous to Burns's interests. A scientist who is publicly associated with flying cars that crash and teleporters that malfunction is much easier to dismiss. Frink's professional failures may be the price of his continued presence in Springfield. The show is doing something genuinely disturbing when you read it this way, suggesting that the town's most qualified observer of its own contamination has found the form of existence that allows him to survive in it, and that form requires him to be seen as incompetent. There is also, running beneath all of this, the episode in which Frink's father returns from the dead, in which the two scientists share a peculiarly moving reconciliation that is played as absurdist comedy but contains real emotional weight. The elder Frank shows characteristics suggesting he was also a brilliant, marginalized scientist who never quite achieved what his abilities should have made possible, who lived his professional life in the margins of mainstream scientific recognition, who made discoveries that went unacknowledged and built things that nobody properly appreciated. The implication that Frank Jr. is following the same trajectory is quiet but persistent. Intelligence in Springfield does not translate into influence. It translates into eccentricity, into spectacle, into the specific social category of the brilliant fool who is allowed to entertain rather than required to be heard. Frank inherited this category from his father, the way Milhouse inherited his social position from Kirk Van Houten. Not through any failure of his own, but through the specific gravity of a social world that has already decided what intelligence is for. Frank is the most educated person in Springfield. He is also, in the ways that matter for changing the town's actual situation, the most powerless. And the combination of those two things, in a town run by a man who actively benefits from his residents being unable to understand their own situation, is not an accident. It is policy. Stuart Discotheque, better known as Disco Stu, wears clothing from the 1970s at all times. He speaks in the idioms of that era with a commitment that suggests either extraordinary dedication or a specific kind of psychological anchoring that has made the era's vocabulary the only one he can fully access. He references cultural touchstones that most of Springfield's residents experience as historical artifacts, as the kind of thing you find described in books rather than remembered from lived experience. He is, in the most literal possible sense, a man who never left a particular decade. The show presents this as a joke. Disco Stu's entire comedic identity is the joke that the party is over and he hasn't received the message, that he missed the cultural memo telling him to pack up the platform shoes and the rhinestones and get with whatever came next, that he continues inhabiting an era that the rest of the world exited 40 years ago and apparently has no intention of catching up. But here is the thing the show drops in quietly and then never quite examines. In one episode, Disco Stu reveals that his permanent costume, his total commitment to 1970s fashion and culture and manner of speaking, began as a marketing strategy, a way of making himself distinctive, of standing out in the particular social landscape of Springfield by occupying a niche nobody else was occupying. And the strategy simply never ended. He found an identity that worked in a specific moment and held on to it long after the moment was gone, because the identity itself had become load-bearing. It was holding him together. Without the platform shoes and the rhinestones and the idioms, there was nothing underneath to replace it. That is not a joke, or at least not only a joke. That is a portrait of a man who experienced an identity crisis so severe that he resolved it by permanently arresting his own development at the moment before the crisis began. Who chose the fixed point over the uncertainty of continued movement? Who found a version of himself that he could inhabit completely and then inhabited it so completely that the person who might have existed after that version became simply unavailable. Under the floating timeline theory, Disco Stu becomes interesting in a specific way. Every character in Springfield is frozen in time to some degree. Nobody ages. Nobody fundamentally changes in ways that are acknowledged by the narrative. But most characters maintain at least the pretense of living in the present. They reference current events. They use contemporary technology. They exist in whatever year the episode is set in and are shaped by that year's cultural context, even if they do not change in response to it. Disco Stu does not do this. He has not done this for the entire run of the show. He is the only character who explicitly, visibly, and with apparent deliberateness refuses to inhabit the present tense. He has chosen his moment, and he is living in it, and the present continuing to move forward around him is simply not his concern. If everyone in Springfield is frozen in time by forces they can't perceive or control, radiation or coma or collective denial or Burns's peculiar management of the town's cognitive state, Disco Stu is the only one who chose his frozen moment deliberately. He picked his era. He decorated his existence around it. He turned temporal stasis into an aesthetic statement and maintained that statement with extraordinary discipline across decades. And the show gave him a name that begins with disco and ends with Stu, which manages to be both perfect and slightly sad. You take an entire decade of cultural identity and reduce it to a nickname, And then you let the man wearing that nickname wander the edges of Springfield scenes for 36 years without anyone asking what it feels like to watch the world keep changing while you stay where you decided to stay. Milhouse Van Houten is Bart's best friend. He has been Bart's best friend since the first episode. He is, depending on how you count these things, one of the most consistently present non-Simpson characters in the entire history of the show, appearing in more scenes across more episodes than almost anyone outside the core family. And he is also, with remarkable and consistent precision, the character who absorbs the most punishment for the least reward across the show's entire run. Milhouse is the target of bullying from Nelson Muntz, with a regularity that suggests it has become almost institutional. He is the object of romantic fixation that Lisa Simpson refuses to reciprocate with any seriousness. He is the sidekick in Bart's schemes who receives the consequences while Bart receives whatever credit or escape is available. He is the character who most frequently cries, most frequently fails, most frequently tries genuinely hard at something, and most frequently ends up exactly where he started, with slightly more damage than before, and no particular lesson extracted from the experience. The show knows this, it has known it for decades, and it has been using this knowledge deliberately. Milhouse's essential character is his capacity to absorb disappointment and return for more, and the show has built entire storylines around examining both how that capacity developed and what it costs him to maintain it. His parents' divorce is handled with a genuine sensitivity that is unusual in a comedy series. Kirk Van Houten's collapse after the marriage ends, the episode where he releases his sad country single and it becomes a minor local tragedy that everyone witnesses and nobody can quite look away from, these are among the show's most earnest emotional moments outside of its obvious classics. The show takes Milhouse's family seriously even when it is clearly also making jokes about them. The jokes and the seriousness coexist without canceling each other out, which is one of the show's particular skills. But here is the thread that runs underneath all of it. The Van Houten family, across multiple generations, has been a family that wants things it cannot quite access. Kirk wants to be a successful businessman and becomes a divorced man living in a studio apartment with motivational posters and a can of Pepsi and a life that has been dramatically reduced from what he expected. Luann wants stability and continuous forward movement and ends up cycling through relationships that don't resolve into the thing she was looking for. Milhouse wants Lisa and genuine friendship and to matter to someone in a way that is reciprocal and sustained, and he keeps finding himself in second place, an afterthought, the friend who is needed for a specific purpose rather than valued for what he actually is. The Van Houtens are Springfield's portrait of aspiration without sufficient resources to convert aspiration into outcome. They are the middle of the middle class in a town where the middle class exists entirely at the pleasure of a billionaire who could dissolve their economic reality on a Tuesday afternoon if the returns on his current arrangement ever stopped being satisfying. Kirk Van Houten once had a corporate job. He lost it in a layoff that the show treats as comedy, but that, held at arm's length and examined directly, describes an experience that was genuinely devastating to him and that he never fully recovered from. He then had to start from scratch in his 40s in a town with essentially one major employer and a surrounding economic ecosystem that exists entirely in that employer's orbit. The options available to a middle-aged man with a skill set adapted to a corporate context that no longer wants him, in a town where the economic alternatives are limited by the dominant position of a single entity that has no particular interest in expanding those alternatives, are genuinely constrained. Milhouse inherited this precarity. Not through any personal failure, not through any choice he was old enough to make when the inheritance was being settled. He inherited the social and economic position of a family that lost its footing in a town where the footing is controlled by someone who doesn't know his name and wouldn't recognize his face. The show gives Milhouse a specific look that marks him as someone who was designed by circumstance to be noticed for the wrong reasons. Blue hair, large glasses, a nose the animators draw with particular emphasis, an overall physical presence that suggests someone who has been shaped by the forces acting on him, rather than someone who has shaped his own presentation. He looks like someone absorbing the environment rather than asserting himself within it. He is Bart's witness. He watches everything that happens and feels it more acutely than Bart does, because Bart has a native resilience and a social confidence that Milhouse simply does not possess. Bart bounces off difficulty. Milhouse lands in it and stays there for a while. And then he shows up again next episode, glasses slightly crooked, ready to be Bart's best friend one more time. Because the friendship, even imperfect, even exploitative in certain ways, is still the best available thing, and Springfield has taught the Van Houtens to be grateful for the best available thing. Willie is Scottish. The show makes this clear in every possible way, through accent and temperament and periodic references to a homeland that is always somewhere else, always behind him, always the thing he came from rather than the thing he is going to. He maintains Springfield Elementary's grounds with a combination of genuine physical skill and violent contempt for the environment he is working in. He is the school's janitor, its occasional handyman, its emergency crisis respondent when the situation becomes too physically demanding for Skinner to handle alone. He lives in a shack on the school grounds in conditions that represent the absolute minimum of what can be called a living space, his entire material existence contained within a structure that most people would use for storing seasonal equipment. And across more than 3 decades of episodes, Willie has revealed fragments of his backstory that the show never fully assembles into a continuous narrative. He left Scotland. He came to Springfield. He lives on school property with no apparent connections to Springfield's civic life beyond his employment. He is, in the most precise sense of the word, exiled, living in a community he did not come from and has never been fully absorbed into. The show occasionally gives Willie moments of unexpected depth that arrive sideways through the comedy. He has demonstrated genuine, rough affection for certain children, a protectiveness that sits underneath the gruffness and the surface performance of toughness that shows itself in situations where a child is in real trouble, and Willie responds before anyone else has processed that there is something to respond to. He has shown skills and knowledge that extend well beyond groundskeeping, suggesting an education and a life before Springfield that the show teases but never fully explores. Why did he leave Scotland? The show gives comic answers when the question surfaces. A sheep, a Highland game gone catastrophically wrong, something involving a clan dispute that is played for its absurdist potential and then released. But the consistent thread underneath all the different comic versions is that Willie left under pressure, that there was something he could not stay for or could not escape from. That Springfield was not a destination so much as a landing point, the place he ended up when the movement away from Scotland finally ran out of momentum, which makes Springfield Elementary's grounds his territory in a way that goes beyond the employment relationship. He tends that land the way someone tends a place they have decided, in the absence of anywhere better, to belong to, with a possessiveness that sometimes reads as fury and a tenderness for the soil itself that he would be embarrassed to be observed expressing directly. He is a displaced person who has transformed his displacement into groundskeeping. The land is what he has instead of a home, and he cares for it accordingly. Willie is one of the show's clearest portraits of what happens to people who are displaced, and then stay displaced long enough that the displacement becomes the identity. He is neither Scottish in the sense of someone who lives in Scotland and is shaped by that ongoing context, nor Springfieldian in the sense of someone who belongs to the community's social fabric. He is a man between places who has filled the gap with labor and noise, and the ongoing performance of being Willie, an identity he has constructed around absence rather than belonging. And the school he tends is attended by the children of people who are, in their various ways, doing something similar, filling the gap between who they were supposed to become and who they actually are with work and noise, and the ongoing performance of whatever Springfield needs them to be today. His name is Jeff Albertson. The show revealed this at some point in its run as a piece of trivia, delivered in the way the show sometimes delivers information that complicates a character without fully explaining them, and then more or less returned to calling him comic book guy in virtually every subsequent scene because Jeff Albertson is not who he is. Comic book guy is who he is. He is the owner of the Android's Dungeon and Baseball card shop. He is the internet's physical incarnation inside Springfield, appearing in that role a decade before the internet became what the internet became, and making that role feel entirely natural within Springfield's social ecology. He is the expert, the connoisseur, the person who knows more about his specific domain than anyone else in town, and who weaponizes that knowledge as a defense against every form of human intimacy that might otherwise reach him. The show has given comic book guy romantic storylines. They are treated with the comedy that his character generates as a matter of course. The idea that someone like him could be loved, could be genuinely desired, could find himself in a relationship that functions the way relationships are meant to function, is presented as inherently surprising, as an outcome that requires explanation and comedic examination. And then, occasionally, the show undercuts its own joke by giving him a moment of genuine vulnerability that lands with a weight the surrounding comedy does not quite account for. He has a master's degree. He has articulated aesthetic positions during various arguments with characters who do not quite have the vocabulary to engage with what he is saying, that are more sophisticated than anyone in his vicinity gives him credit for. He has demonstrated, in certain episodes, that his encyclopedic knowledge of popular culture is not merely a storage system for trivia, but a framework for understanding how stories work, why stories matter to people, what it means when a story fails to honor its own internal logic, and why that failure is felt as a kind of betrayal rather than simply a disappointment. That last point is the key to Comic Book Guy, the thing that explains his otherwise mysterious intensity. His entire personality is organized around the conviction that stories should be internally consistent, that established rules should be honored, that the relationship between a creator and an audience is a contract that both parties are obligated to uphold. He is disappointed not because stories fall short of some abstract ideal, but because he has invested himself in the relationship that good storytelling creates, and the failure of the story feels like the failure of that relationship. He is, in other words, the character most qualified and most likely to notice every single mystery and inconsistency and buried contradiction that the show has accumulated across 36 years of production. He is Springfield's most rigorous critic. He has the analytical tools. He has the patience for close reading. He has the investment in the relationship between story and audience that makes inconsistency feel like a personal affront rather than an innocent error. And he lives in a basement full of comics and has no institutional power and no audience beyond the occasional customer who wanders in to buy something and leaves. Comic Book Guy knows. That is the implication that hums underneath his surface function as a joke about obsessive fan culture. He knows that the show's internal logic has been compromised in specific and traceable ways. He knows that certain things do not add up and has probably cataloged them. He knows that the continuity has frayed in ways that cannot be attributed to innocent error, and his response to knowing is to retreat further into the perfectly organized archive of his shop, where at least the back issues are stored in acid-free bags, and the numbering is sequential, and the stories end exactly where they are supposed to end, and the rules are honored, and the contract is kept. He built a fortress of consistent narrative in a town where consistent narrative is impossible. That is not pathetic. That is what survival looks like for someone whose value system is organized around internal consistency. Kent Brockman is Springfield's face. Not Burns's face, not the mayor's face, not the face that the town presents to power. Kent Brockman is the face the town presents to itself every evening at 6 and 11. The voice that tells Springfield what Springfield is, the frame through which the community understands its own events and decides how to feel about them. And Kent Brockman is extraordinarily easy to manipulate. The show has demonstrated this repeatedly, across episodes and seasons, with a consistency that elevates it from running gag to actual character study. Kent shifts his editorial position based on the apparent winds of power at any given moment. He welcomed overlords when he briefly believed they had won. He adopted multiple incompatible political positions within single episodes based on which way the studio audience seemed to be moving or which way the institutional pressures seemed to be pushing. He endorsed candidates and withdrew endorsements within cycles that would be alarming in a real journalist and are alarming here even wrapped in comedy. This is satire of media figures broadly, and the satire is accurate as far as it goes. But it is also a portrait of something specific to Springfield, something that the show has been doing carefully rather than casually. Kent Brockman has survived in his position for the entire run of the show. He has held the anchor chair through multiple civic catastrophes, through events that should have generated sustained, critical, adversarial journalism from someone in his position. He has reported on all of it with the kind of coverage that acknowledges things happen without ever quite pushing on why they happen or who benefits from them happening. He has been Springfield's official narrator of events without ever becoming an actual investigator of events. The question is whether that is cowardice or calculation, and the show does not entirely answer it. Whether Kent bends because he is genuinely afraid of what happens to journalists in Springfield who do not bend, or because he has been in the business long enough to understand that bending is what the business requires, and he has simply accepted this as the nature of the work. Whether his adaptability is a failure of character or a successful adaptation to a specific environment. What the show does suggest, through the consistency of the pattern, is that Springfield's media environment is not an environment that produces honest journalism. It is an environment that produces coverage. That covers events without necessarily illuminating them, that tells you what happened without necessarily explaining what it means, or why it matters, or who is responsible for it. Kent is the instrument of this coverage, the mechanism by which Springfield's story is told to Springfield in a form that Springfield can receive without being too disturbed. He is the town's mirror, as we have noted before. But mirrors do not show you what is really there. They show you a reversed image that you have learned, through long practice, to read as direct. Kent Brockman shows Springfield a version of itself that is safe and comprehensible and does not require the audience to ask hard questions before bed. The audience, grateful, tunes in every evening and takes the reversed image for the real thing. And Kent, equally grateful, cashes his paycheck and prepares for the next evening's broadcast. Eleanor Abernathy, the crazy cat lady, appears in the background of outdoor scenes in Springfield with her arms full of cats and her mouth producing sounds that the show presents as incoherent, as the vocalizations of someone who has slipped far enough from conventional social functioning that meaningful communication is no longer really accessible to her, except that it is not entirely incoherent. In certain episodes, if you listen carefully, the sounds she makes resolve into fragments of normal speech, into pieces of sentences that suggest a person who is still present underneath the performance, still thinking in something like the patterns that organized thinking takes, still connected to language even if that connection is frayed and intermittent and difficult to access from the outside. The show reveals her backstory in a single episode, and the revelation is genuinely striking. Eleanor Abernathy was a doctor. She was simultaneously working toward a law degree. She had achieved by any standard measurement an extraordinary level of professional accomplishment, had navigated systems that resist most people who attempt them, and had succeeded in multiple of those systems at once. She was brilliant, capable, driven, and by conventional measurement, successful. And then something happened. The show depicts it with its characteristic combination of absurdist surface and genuine emotional weight underneath. Ambition ran into disappointment in specific and compounding ways. The pressures of being a woman who wanted to matter in ways that the world around her was not prepared to accommodate, in an era when those pressures were particularly severe, created a kind of internal structural stress that the external achievements could not relieve. She arrived, through a series of choices and events and the cumulative weight of a particular kind of life, at the corner of her current block with her cats and her incoherent sounds, and has been there ever since. The show plays this as comedy and then immediately treats it as genuine tragedy in the same episode, within perhaps 4 minutes of screen time, moving between the registers with a fluency that suggests the writers understood that both responses were simultaneously appropriate. It tells you she was brilliant. It tells you she cracked. It tells you what she became. And then it moves on and puts her back in the background where she can throw a cat at someone whenever the scene needs a physical beat. But she stays in the background. Episode after episode, season after season, she is visually present in Springfield's civic space, carrying her cats through the edges of other people's storylines, occupying the public spaces of the town with a consistency that suggests she is not simply background decoration, but a deliberate, ongoing presence. She is at the park. She is at town meetings. She is outside the donut shop and in the background of street scenes, and present at events that have nothing specifically to do with her. Eleanor Abernathy is everywhere. She just does not say anything that the world around her is equipped to receive as meaningful anymore. And if you choose to read this pattern as deliberate rather than incidental, what you find is something that the show has been doing quietly for decades. It placed a woman who had everything to say, who had 2 entire professional identities worth of things to say about the world she had inhabited and been failed by, right in the middle of every public scene, and then took away her ability to say them in a form that anyone would hear. She is, if you read her this way, the show's most pointed portrait of what happens to intelligence and ambition and genuine human capacity when the systems that are supposed to receive and reward these qualities decide instead to grind them down. She is the outcome. She is what you get after enough cycles of having the thing you are and the thing the world will allow you to be in direct and sustained conflict. She is Springfield's most educated person in its most public spaces. And she has been reduced to background noise. That is either a sad accident or a very deliberate creative choice. Probably both. Before we go any further into Springfield's deeper secrets, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from and what time it is there. And if this is exactly what you needed tonight, subscribe so you're here for the next one. Now let's keep going. Section 2. The Simpsons' Hidden Music Codes. There is music underneath everything in Springfield. Not the obvious music. Not Danny Elfman's famous main theme with its driving brass and its particular quality of suburban anxiety, packed into approximately 4 minutes of melodic invention that has become one of the most recognizable pieces of music in American entertainment history. Not the incidental jingles or the song parodies that the show deploys as jokes when it needs a character to communicate something through music rather than dialogue. The music underneath the music. The way the show uses sound to tell stories that the image cannot quite reach, to signal things that the animation can only gesture at, to carry emotional information through your ears, while your eyes are occupied tracking something else entirely in the foreground of the frame. The Simpsons has one of the most sophisticated approaches to underscore in the history of American television comedy. And most viewers have never consciously noticed it because the score is designed not to be noticed in the way that you notice a melody. It is designed to do its work below the threshold of deliberate attention, to shape how you feel about what you are seeing without announcing that it is doing so, to influence the emotional quality of your experience in ways that feel internal rather than external, that feel like your own response rather than a response being prompted from outside. But if you listen carefully, across enough episodes and across enough seasons, a set of patterns emerges. Recurring musical gestures tied to specific characters and specific situations, tonal shifts that signal more than the surface story appears to require, silences placed with the same precision as the notes surrounding them, used as instruments in their own right, and a consistent architecture of sound that tells you, if you know how to hear it, that Springfield has a much more complex interior life than the jokes ever fully acknowledge. Danny Elfman wrote the Simpsons theme in 1989. He was already a composer with a specific and recognizable voice, known for the gothic playfulness of his work with Tim Burton, for a particular quality of music that manages to be simultaneously childlike and unsettling. That sounds like fun on first listen and reveals something stranger and more complicated on subsequent encounters. The theme he built for The Simpsons is one of the most instructive pieces of American television music to examine closely because it does so much work in such a compact space, and because the work it does is not simply the work of brand, identification, or tonal establishment, but something more precise and more interesting. It begins with a musical phrase that is held in isolation and listened to without any visual context, a question. A rising figure that does not immediately resolve, that hangs in the air for a beat before the melody catches it and carries it forward into the body of the theme. This opening phrase is the show's thesis statement encoded in musical terms. Something is unresolved here. Something is pending. There is a question being asked that the following material will address but never quite fully answer. And this is appropriate because the show itself is 36 years of never quite fully answering its own questions. The main body of the theme is written in a major key. This means it sounds, in the most immediate and visceral way, that music communicates emotional quality. Fundamentally happy. The major key is the key of sunshine and children, and everything is basically fine in the world around you. This is Springfield's public face in musical form. But the theme is full of unexpected chromatic turns. Moments where the melody makes a detour into a note that should not quite belong in the harmonic context it is arriving in, that creates a brief moment of strangeness or unresolved tension, and then resolves back to the safety of the major key, and the cheerful primary melody continues as if nothing happened. These chromatic moments are the show's darkness encoded in the music. They appear within the cheerful structure of the major key melody. They create a moment of strangeness that your ear registers even if your mind does not consciously process it, and then they resolve and the cheerfulness resumes and the show moves forward. This is exactly what the show does narratively. Week after week. It is fundamentally a comedy in a major key, fundamentally organized around jokes and warmth and the particular affection it has for its own characters. But it keeps making these chromatic turns into moments of genuine darkness or genuine sadness or disturbing implication that sit in the frame for long enough to be felt, and then it resolves back to the default register before the audience has had time to fully process what just happened. The music and the narrative are doing the same thing. The theme describes the show's entire emotional strategy in 4 minutes. The couch gag section of the theme, the moment where the music pauses briefly and then resumes as the family runs to the couch from their various directions, is rhythmically consistent even when the couch gag itself varies wildly in content, duration, tone, and ambition. The music holds steady while the visuals do whatever they are going to do that particular week. This creates an interesting structural dynamic. Usually in television, the image is the constant, and the music serves the image, adapting to whatever the visual story requires. In this specific portion of The Simpsons opening, the relationship inverts. The music is the anchor, and the image orbits around it. The music says, "Whatever you see, however strange or elaborate or dark or funny or surreal the couch gag becomes this week, we are still in the same show. The Kawashik is still here. The family still arrives together. The music still plays." Alf Clausen composed original music for The Simpsons from 1990 through 2017, 27 seasons, more than 500 episodes. He scored more of this show than any other single creative contributor, and in doing so, he developed a musical language for Springfield that became as specific and recognizable as the show's visual style or its writing voice. A language that Springfield viewers learned without ever being taught it, absorbing it across years of watching the show until the associations between certain musical gestures and certain emotional or narrative contexts became automatic. One of the most important principles Clausen established was that Springfield's score would take its emotional cues from the characters and their genuine situations, rather than from genre convention or tonal expectation. When the show wanted you to feel something real, when it was reaching for genuine emotion rather than comedic approximation of emotion, the music would play that feeling straight. No irony, no winking at the camera, no musical equivalent of quotation marks around the feeling to signal that the show knows the feeling is perhaps excessive for a cartoon about a yellow family in a fictional town. When Homer Simpson is genuinely heartbroken, the score is heartbroken with him. When Homer experiences a moment of real connection or genuine love, the score validates that experience with the full emotional weight that the orchestration can provide. The music refuses to undercut the moment, and this refusal is what makes those moments land with the force they do. This represents a genuine artistic risk in the context of a comedy series. The safe choice is to maintain ironic distance, to keep the score slightly at arm's length from the emotional content, so that if the audience responds with laughter rather than feeling, the show can retreat to the comedy and pretend the moment was never reaching for anything more. Clausen's approach commits. It trusts the emotion and plays it fully, and it trusts the audience to be capable of feeling it genuinely, even within the context of a show that is primarily organized around jokes. The result is a show with a much wider emotional range than its premise suggests. A show that can make you laugh in one moment and break your heart in the next, because the music understands both registers fully and moves between them with fluency. Clausen also developed what might be described as the specific sonic texture of Springfield, the sound of the town as a place rather than merely as a setting. The orchestral color, the specific combination of instruments and arrangement styles that recurs in scenes of ordinary Springfield life, creates an auditory impression of the place that is as immediate and recognizable as its visual appearance. When you hear certain combinations of strings and woodwinds arranged in Clausen's characteristic way, you know where you are without needing to see the image. You are in Springfield. The music tells you so. There is a recurring rhythmic pattern in 3/4 time, a waltz figure that appears in Clausen's score during scenes of domestic life, ordinary Springfield business, the town going about its daily rhythms. The waltz rhythm is historically loaded with specific connotations. It is inherently nostalgic. It is associated with a kind of formal, ordered social life. It carries the suggestion of something slightly ceremonial, slightly preserved, slightly self-conscious about its own performance of normalcy. Its use in scenes of Springfield's ordinary life is doing something quiet and continuous. It is framing the ordinary as something slightly historical, slightly preserved behind glass, slightly performing its own ordinariness in a way that real ordinary life does not. And this connects to everything else the show is doing. Springfield's ordinary life is ordinary only if you do not look at it too carefully. The waltz rhythm in the underscore is a gentle, continuous signal that the ordinary is a construction here, that it is being maintained through active effort, that it requires a certain kind of musical framing to hold together as ordinariness at all. The music of Mr. Burns is one of the most consistent and carefully constructed musical identities in the show's entire score, and it repays close attention. When Burns appears or is referenced in ways that the score marks as significant, the music tends toward a specific orchestral archetype, the Romantic-era villain theme, heavy on the brass, rich with chromaticism, drawing on a tradition of orchestral writing that was developed specifically in the 19th century to evoke Gothic menace, industrial power, aristocratic privilege exercised without accountability, and the specific quality of threat that comes from someone who has enough resources to not care about the rules that govern everyone else. This is not a casual choice. Burns is explicitly modeled on the industrial robber barons of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. His visual design carries clear references to that period. His speech patterns, his vocabulary, his casual assumptions about the proper relationship between himself and the people who work for him, all of these belong to an era of American capitalism that presented itself as a natural order rather than a social arrangement. And his music belongs to that era too. When Burns's theme plays, it sounds like something from a century ago, from the period of his formation, from the time when the systems that sustain his power were first being constructed, and when the men who built those systems had music written for them that celebrated their power as though it were heroic. The temporal dissonance is the point. The show is set in the contemporary present, with contemporary references and contemporary technology and contemporary social arrangements that have nominally moved beyond the conditions that made someone like Burns possible. But Burns's musical identity is rooted in the past. His theme is playing music from a time when his kind of power was celebrated rather than critiqued. And this sonic anachronism marks him as belonging to a different era, as someone whose power is historically rooted in ways that the contemporary world has not fully dismantled, even as it has largely stopped making music that celebrates it. There is a specific musical gesture in Burns's most menacing moments, a descending chromatic figure in the low brass, a slow downward movement through notes that are not quite in the key of what surrounds them, creating a sense of something sinking toward a conclusion that was probably always going to arrive at this particular dark place. This figure appears when Burns makes decisions that will harm Springfield. It appears when his power is being exercised in ways that the audience is meant to understand as destructive, even when the characters in the scene are not fully grasping what is happening to them. The music is scoring the truth for the audience, while the narrative is presenting the surface for the characters. The descending chromatic brass figure is the show's musical acknowledgement that when Burns acts, something sinks. Something is being pulled down toward a place that serves his interests and leaves everything around it worse than it found it. The music tells you this even when the dialogue does not. After Clausen's departure in 2017, following a contract transition that upset many people who had been watching the show's music closely, something in this specific quality of Burns's musical identity shifted. The new compositional approach relies more heavily on pastiche, on borrowing from existing musical styles and templates rather than building from a consistent orchestral voice. The Burns music continues to exist in some form, but it has become simplified, less historically specific, less deeply rooted in the romantic orchestral tradition that made it feel genuinely old in a way that matched Burns's genuine oldness. Fans who notice this, and there are fans who notice this, find that the post-Clausen Simpsons feels slightly less grounded in its own historical consciousness. The music had been carrying a weight of historical awareness that the new approach does not quite replicate. Springfield still sounds like Springfield, but it sounds slightly less like a place that is aware of its own past, which is interesting given how much the show's entire mythology depends on the past being present and operative in the current moment. The Simpsons breaks into song with a frequency that no live-action sitcom of comparable standing could attempt, and that most animated shows would struggle to sustain, without the tradition feeling imposed. It is, in this sense, a musical as much as it is a comedy, regularly finding that the emotional content of a scene is better expressed through song than through dialogue, that the characters have things to say that require the formal expansion that music provides. The show's songs fall into recognizable categories, and the categories tell you something about how the show understands its characters. Marge's songs are almost always organized around longing, around the gap between what she has and what she wants, or between the person she is and the person the role requires her to be, or between the present moment she is inhabiting and some other moment she can see from the corner of her eye. When Marge sings, the show is giving her access to an emotional vocabulary that her regular dialogue does not fully provide. The show positions Marge as the household's stable center, the practical one, the person whose job is to hold everything together, and this positioning tends to make certain kinds of emotional expression unavailable to her in prose. But in song she can say things that the character's function in the narrative would otherwise constrain. Homer's songs are almost always about simple desires expressed with total conviction. Beer and donuts and Marge and the children and the couch and the television. His musical expression is direct and unself-conscious in a way that his regular dialogue sometimes manages and sometimes does not, and the songs make his essential character explicit in a way that is clarifying rather than reductive. He wants the things he has. He loves the people around him with a completeness that his intelligence does not complicate because his intelligence is not organized around complicating things. His songs are love songs to the ordinary life he is leading, and their directness is what makes them land. The songs the show uses to mark moments of collective Springfield action are the most politically interesting musical material the show produces. These are the songs that accompany crowd formation, that appear when Springfield is building toward one of its characteristic mob moments, that provide the musical framework for the community coming together around something. And they are almost always written to be genuinely catchy. Alarmingly catchy. The show writes hooks for its most morally problematic collective moments, with a craft that could reasonably be described as excessive. This is deliberate. The music for Springfield at its worst, for the moments when the population is consolidating around an impulse that is foolish or cruel or simply wrong, is the music that gets into your head. It is memorable. It is fun to hum. And somewhere in the experience of finding yourself humming the mob's theme while you're going about your day, there is a very dark joke about how enthusiasm spreads through populations, about how movements find their rhythm and their music, and how the music makes the movement feel like something you want to be part of even when what the movement is doing is not something you should want to be part of. The show uses silence with a precision that becomes more visible the more closely you attend to it. Most television comedy fills its sonic space continuously. The score runs under scenes, the ambient sound fills gaps, the laugh track or its modern equivalents maintain the audience's sense of engagement with the material. The Simpsons does this too most of the time, maintaining the conventional sonic density of television comedy because the convention serves the show's needs in most of its scenes. But the show knows when to cut the music entirely and allow something to land in the space that remains. These moments of near silence are not accidents or production oversights. They are choices, made with the same deliberateness that governs the most elaborate musical cues. They are the places where the score steps back and says, I have done what I can do. What happens here requires more than music. What happens here requires the audience to be alone with the thing. The most famous of these moments is the ending of Mother Simpson, the episode in which Homer discovers his mother is alive and then has to say goodbye to her again as she flees from Burns's pursuit. Throughout the episode, the music has worked hard. It has carried the reunion, which is genuinely moving, and it has carried the rediscovery of why the separation happened, which is genuinely enraging, and it has carried the goodbye, which is devastating in the specific way that the show's best emotional moments are devastating. Quietly, without fanfare, without the swelling orchestral underline that lesser shows would deploy, and then the episode ends with Homer alone on his car, looking at the stars, and the music reduces to almost nothing. Not complete silence. There is ambient sound. There is the sense of the night around him, the ordinary sounds of a Springfield evening. But the score is gone. The orchestra has stepped back entirely. And Homer sits there in the near silence, and the thing he feels is too large to have music under it. And the show knows this, and the credits roll in that near silence. And the audience sits with Homer in the quiet dark with nothing to process the moment through except whatever they themselves bring to it. This is sophisticated television craft. This is the show demonstrating that it understands the emotional landscape of the material it is working with well enough to know when music helps and when music would reduce. And the moments when the score goes quiet are, reliably, the moments the show is most sure of. The music steps away from confidence. It steps away from the moments it trusts most completely to stand without support. Section 3. The Architecture of the Simpson Home. 742, Evergreen Terrace. Let the address settle for a moment. It is the most famous fictional address in American television history, more deeply embedded in the cultural memory of the show's audience than the actual addresses of most buildings where real memories were made. The house at 742 Evergreen Terrace has been inside the cultural imagination for so long, has appeared so many times in so many different contexts, that most viewers stopped seeing it years ago. It became background. It became the given. It became the thing you recognize before you look at it, the image your eye moves past on the way to whatever is happening in the foreground. But if you look at it, if you make the effort to actually examine the house across the full 36-year run of the show, what you find is one of the most thoroughly inconsistent structures in the history of fiction, a building that has a different number of rooms in different episodes, that has a basement of varying depth and dimensions, that has a staircase that changes location, that has a kitchen whose relationship to the living room depends on which story the episode needs to tell. And this inconsistency is not a production error. It is not laziness or oversight. It is the record of a building that means different things to different people, that cannot hold still because the people inside it cannot quite agree on what it is, that exists in a different configuration depending on whose experience is organizing the scene we are watching. The house at 742 Evergreen Terrace changes shape because it is a house that is experienced differently by each of its inhabitants. For Homer, the house is primarily the couch, the kitchen, and the path between them, with secondary zones around the television, the refrigerator, and the door to the garage. For Marge, the house is the kitchen, the bedrooms, the laundry, the spaces she maintains and organizes and keeps running, the domestic infrastructure whose continuous functioning is her ongoing project. For Bart, the house is primarily his room and the ways out of it, the windows and the back door and the routes through the neighborhood that lead away from the immediate authority of the household. For Lisa, the house is her window, her saxophone, her books, and the persistent experience of a space that is not quite large enough for what she brings to it. For Maggie, the house is everything, immediate and total and organized not by function but by sensation. A house experienced 5 different ways by 5 different people does not have a stable shape. It has 5 shapes depending on whose experience is generating the space. The animators of The Simpsons have been, across 36 years and perhaps without fully theorizing it this way, drawing the house as it is perceived rather than as it exists, according to some fixed architectural plan. And perception differs. The house looks different when Homer is in it, than when Marge is in it, than when Lisa is in it. The rooms are in different places. The scale is slightly different. The proportions shift. This is, in its way, one of the show's most genuinely experimental formal choices, and it has been hiding in plain sight for the entire run. Homer's basement is one of the most narratively significant spaces in the show's entire geography, and it is almost entirely unexamined by the characters who nominally own it. The basement at 742 Evergreen Terrace is where things go when they cannot be dealt with on the surface. It is where Homer retreats when the world above him becomes too complicated, too demanding, too full of the social and emotional requirements that his particular kind of intelligence is not well equipped to navigate. It is where old projects live in states of permanent incompletion, surrounded by the equipment that was purchased for them and the plans that were abandoned when the initial enthusiasm ran out. It is where the structural systems of the house are located, the heating and the plumbing and the electrical infrastructure that keeps everything above it functioning. But these systems are never quite explained, never quite mapped, never quite presented as things that Homer fully understands even though he has lived above them for decades. In multiple episodes, Homer has descended to his basement and discovered things there that he did not know were present. Objects suggesting a history he has no access to. Evidence of activities or occupants predating his ownership of the property. The basement is a space that does not fully belong to Homer even though it is nominally his, because the basement is where time accumulates in a house, where the sediment of previous occupants and previous uses settles into layers that the current residents inherit without understanding. The basement, in the show's spatial grammar, is the unconscious of the household, the place where what cannot be processed on the surface level goes to wait. And Homer's relationship with his basement mirrors his relationship with his own interior life. He goes down there when things above ground are too much. He finds things he did not expect to find. He does not always understand what he has found. And then he goes back upstairs and continues. And the basement remains below him, containing whatever it contained. Under the coma theory, the basement takes on a specific resonance. If the house is a construct of Homer's dreaming mind, assembled from memory and longing and the brain's attempts to maintain something that resembles the life it was living before the vending machine fell, Then the basement is the part of the dream where the dreamer's actual memories and suppressed knowledge are stored. The things Homer finds down there that confuse or disturb him are the fragments of real life breaking through the dream's surface, the edges of actual experience surfacing through the fictional texture of Springfield. The basement is where the dream gets porous, where reality leaks in at the edges, and Homer never spends enough time down there to notice the leaks. The attic at 742 Evergreen Terrace is a space of memory. When it appears almost exclusively as a repository of the family's past, a storage space for things that are too meaningful to throw away and too associated with a time that has passed to be integrated into the current life of the household. Old photographs, childhood belongings, evidence of who Homer and Marge were before the show began, before the children arrived, before the story that the audience has been watching had a beginning. The attic is the one space in the house that explicitly acknowledges the existence of time. Everything in the rest of the house exists in the permanent present that the floating timeline provides. The couch is always the same couch. The kitchen counter is always the same height. The bedrooms always contain the same people doing the same things they were doing the last time you saw them. The house is locked in the present tense with the same completeness that the characters within it are locked in their permanent ages. But the attic is full of things that have been stored precisely because they belong to a different time, because they carry the weight of moments that have passed and cannot be retrieved but also cannot be simply discarded. The attic is the room that admits what the rest of the house is designed to deny, that there is a before, that things have happened and left material traces. That the family. Section 4. Burns Manor and the Geography of Power. There are two addresses in Springfield that matter more than any others. 742 Evergreen Terrace is the one we have just spent a section exploring. The house that changes shape depending on whose experience is organizing the scene, the building that contains the show's emotional center and holds the family together across 36 years of chaos and reset and collective forgetting. The other address has no number in any consistent sense. It has no street name that appears on a municipal map anyone can access. It stands on a hill above Springfield, visible from nearly every part of the town below, enormous and stone, and positioned with a deliberateness that has nothing to do with convenience or efficiency, and everything to do with a statement about the relationship between the person who lives there and the people who do not. Burns Manor. The house of Charles Montgomery Burns is not a house in any sense that the word house normally implies. It is not a private residence in the way that most people understand private residences, as spaces organized around the comfort and the daily rhythms of the people who live in them. It is a geographic statement, an architectural argument delivered in stone and height and scale, a structure that communicates something about power that its owner never needs to say directly because the building has been saying it continuously for as long as it has been standing, which may be considerably longer than Springfield itself has been a town. The show has used Burns Manor, across its entire run, to do some of its most sophisticated work on what it means to live in a society where a single building can dominate the visual horizon and, through its dominance of the visual horizon, shape the imagination and the aspirations and the sense of what is possible for everyone who lives within sight of it. In most episodes where Burns Manor appears as an establishing shot, the camera shows it from below. You look up at the structure from the perspective of Springfield's streets and residents, and the manor occupies the upper portion of the frame in a way that is difficult not to register as threatening even when the episode's tone is comedic. The stonework is dark. The towers do what towers do in architectural vocabulary. They assert height, they imply surveillance, they suggest that what is up there is in a different relationship to the landscape than what is down here. This is not a casual compositional choice. The show has made a consistent decision across decades to present Burns's home from the perspective of the people who live beneath it, not from Burns's own perspective, not from some neutral angle that would present the structure as simply a building in a landscape. You see the manor the way Springfield sees it, which is to say from below, with your neck tilted at the angle that looking up at someone else's elevation requires. Inside the manor, the camera reverses. When the show places you within Burns's home, looking out through its windows or across its grounds, you look out over Springfield from above. The windows of Burns Manor frame the town as a prospect, as a managed view, as something that exists to be seen from here rather than something that you are part of. Springfield from inside Burns Manor is scenery. It is the view. It is what you are above. This spatial relationship, looking up versus looking down, experiencing yourself as something seen versus experiencing everything else as your view, is the show's most economical and most precise summary of what the power differential between Burns and Springfield actually feels like to both parties. It requires no dialogue. It is encoded in the architecture and in the camera's positioning relative to the architecture. It is available to the audience in every shot that establishes either the manor or its primary occupant in relation to the town below. Power is altitude. Burns is always higher. Springfield is always looking up. This has been true since the first episode, and it will be true in the last. The rooms inside Burns Manor function more like the galleries of a private museum than like the rooms of a residence organized around comfort and daily use. They contain objects that would be entirely at home in major cultural institutions. Paintings by artists who should be in national collections. Sculptures from civilizations that predate the American Republic by centuries. Artifacts whose historical significance makes their presence in a private home ethically complicated at minimum, and functionally the result of either extraordinary purchase or extraordinary appropriation. Things that belong to the category of cultural heritage and which Burns has removed from that category and placed in his personal storage on a hill above a small American town. The show plays this for comedy when Burns does not quite know what the objects in his own rooms are, when his extreme age and the specific shape of his interests mean that things that should register as precious register instead as confusing or irrelevant. But the accumulation itself is not played as comedy. The scale of what Burns has gathered is presented as simply the reality of someone with his resources and his lifespan, and the presentation does not require us to be disturbed by it because the show has normalized it through repetition. Burns Manor is full of things that were taken from somewhere. The paintings on the walls came from somewhere. The artifacts in the display cases came from somewhere. The trophy heads mounted in whatever room they occupy came from living animals that inhabited the world before Burns decided they should stop inhabiting it and inhabit his wall instead. All of it represents extraction. Burns has spent a century and more moving things toward himself and installing them in a building designed to hold them, to keep them away from the contexts and communities and institutions that generated them. This makes Burns Manor, viewed from a certain angle, not just a house but a repository of extracted value, a physical accumulation of the principle that governs Burns's entire relationship with Springfield, that what exists out there, in the world, in the town, in the environment, in the people, is raw material for the person with sufficient power to process it. The manor's contents are the most literal possible expression of Burns's operating principle. He took them because he could. They are there because he is the kind of person who keeps what he takes. Wayland Smithers has quarters inside Burns Manor. This fact, established across multiple episodes, is one of the show's most quietly revealing details about how both Burns and Smithers actually exist, about the nature of a relationship that the show has examined from multiple angles across decades without quite exhausting what is interesting about it. Smithers does not go home to a separate residence in the evening and return to the manor in the morning. He lives there. He is continuously present. His daily existence and Burns's daily existence are not merely adjacent but substantially overlapping in ways that go well beyond what most professional relationships involve. The show has explored the dimensions of Smithers' situation with varying degrees of directness across different seasons and different episodes. His devotion to Burns is total in a way that has been framed as loyalty, as pathological attachment, as a specific kind of love that the show's earlier seasons encoded, and its later seasons became more willing to address directly. The cultural context around the show changed across its run, and the show's treatment of Smithers changed with it in ways that feel genuine rather than obligatory. But Smithers' residence in Burns Manor is separable from the question of his feelings, and the residence is its own significant fact. He lives there because the function he performs requires his continuous presence. The medical protocol that keeps Burns biologically viable, the weekly treatment schedule, the management of Burns's physical condition, these are not things that can be administered on a 9-to-5 schedule and then left unmonitored for the hours in between. Burns is, as we have established and as the show has established more than once, a biological system that requires active management. He is not maintained by ordinary physiological processes. He is maintained by the intervention of medicine and technology and the continuous attention of a person who understands exactly how the intervention works and what happens when it lapses. Smithers is not simply a devoted assistant who has organized his life around his employer. He is a life support system with feelings. He is the person who knows the protocol. He is the person who manages the schedule. He is the person whose absence, even briefly and even temporarily, would create the conditions for Burns to die. And Smithers knows this. The show has established that Smithers knows this, not as something he has been told, but as something he has figured out through years of close observation and management. This knowledge is the foundation of the relationship. It is what makes Smithers' devotion structurally unlike devotion based purely on feeling or loyalty or the simpler forms of attachment. He is devoted in part because he knows that his absence is lethal, and the knowledge creates a form of obligation that operates independently of his feelings, that would exist even if the feelings were different. He is stayed partly by love and partly by the understanding that leaving would kill someone. His room in Burns Manor, in the episodes where it appears, is modest to the point of institutional. It is not a room that has been decorated or organized to express a self that exists independently of the function it serves within the building it occupies. It is a room organized for the person who lives inside the manor in service of the person who owns the manor, with the specific efficiency of someone who has been living in institutionalized space long enough that the distinction between a room and quarters has ceased to feel meaningful. Smithers has a room. He does not have a home. The difference between having a room and having a home is the distance between who you are in the space you occupy and who the building around you says you are. Inside Burns Manor, whatever else is true about Smithers, he is always inside Burns Manor. Burns Manor and the Springfield nuclear power plant are not separate things. This is the observation that changes everything about how the show's geography means. They are two components of a single system, connected by the same operating logic, serving the same purpose, functioning as the supply side and the command side of the same operation. The power plant generates the wealth through the labor of the people below the manor. The manor holds the wealth and houses the man it sustains, and provides the command center from which the entire operation is administered. The plant provides the electricity and therefore the irreplaceable leverage. The manor provides the vantage point, and therefore the oversight. Between them lies Springfield, the town that depends on both structures, the community that cannot function without the plant's power, and that exists under the continuous observation of the manor's elevation. The people who are employed by the plant and therefore economically connected to it, and who are governed by the political and economic influence that flows from the manor, and who are contaminated by the plant's emissions and surveilled by the manor's position, and who have no realistic mechanism for addressing any of these conditions. Because the mechanisms available to them, the municipal government, the local media, the civic institutions of the town, all exist within the sphere of influence of the same entity that controls the plant and the manor. Springfield lives between its two most important structures, below the manor that observes it, adjacent to the plant that poisons it, in the middle zone where the town's residents conduct their daily lives without fully apprehending the spatial and economic architecture that organizes their existence. The placement of people between the thing that pollutes them and the thing that observes them is either the show's most elegant architectural metaphor or its most direct statement about institutional power and the position of ordinary people within institutional arrangements they did not design and cannot exit. Probably both, in the way that the show's best choices are usually both at the same time. Homer Simpson is the figure in whom these two forces most completely meet. He works in the plant. He is observed from the manor. He has been shaped by the plant's effect on his biology and his cognitive function, and by Burns's decisions about his family's history in ways that define his character and his limitations. He is the person most completely enclosed within the system. The person the system was most completely designed to produce. The perfect employee. And he has never understood the architecture of the situation he is living inside. Several episodes involve ordinary Springfield residents visiting Burns Manor, and these episodes are among the show's most formally interesting because they put ordinary Springfield inside the architectural argument, because they create the opportunity to observe what happens when someone from the town below the hill enters the building on top of it. Homer visits most frequently, and his experiences inside the manor are consistently marked by a specific kind of spatial disorientation. The scale is wrong relative to what his body and experience have prepared him for. The proportions of the rooms are not the proportions of rooms he has lived in or visited. The vocabulary of the space, the specific ways it communicates status and permanence, and the accumulated weight of time and wealth, is speaking a language that Homer has the parts for but cannot assemble into fluent reading. He moves through Burns' manner like someone who has found themselves in a genre they were not prepared for, like someone who has walked through a door expecting one kind of space and found another kind entirely, and who is adapting on the fly without quite having the reference points the adaptation requires. And Burns watches this disorientation with something that the show makes consistently and interestingly complicated to read. It is easy to interpret as contempt. Burns's contempt for Homer is well established and frequently expressed. But in the episodes where Homer is inside the manor, there is another quality in Burns's observation that is harder to name and more interesting to sit with. Something that might be curiosity. Something that might be, in certain moments, a species of respect, or at least a reluctant acknowledgement that Homer represents a phenomenon Burns does not fully understand. Burns cannot comprehend contentment. He cannot understand how someone can be presented with the evidence of what wealth and power make possible, can be standing inside the physical demonstration of what a century of accumulation looks like, and not want it. Homer's apparently genuine satisfaction with his ordinary life, his beer and his couch and his family and his relatively modest existence in the town below the hill, is alien to Burns in a way that the show makes quietly moving in its best moments. Burns has everything, and Homer has something Burns cannot access. The show knows this, and occasionally, in the scenes where the two men are inside the same building, the show lets you see that Burns knows it too. Section 5. The unspoken language of Marge Simpson. Marge Simpson does not say what she means. This is not a criticism of Marge. It is the most important thing to understand about her as a character, and it has been built into her foundation since the first episode, with a consistency and a sophistication that becomes more apparent the longer you have been watching the show. Marge communicates through a system of signals and substitutions that the other characters in her household have never fully learned to read, that the show's audience gradually comes to understand across decades of watching her manage the gap between what she is experiencing and what she says about what she is experiencing, and that represents one of the most quietly sophisticated character studies in the history of American television comedy. She speaks in a specific register, patient, diplomatic, carefully shaped to find the path through difficult territory that minimizes conflict and maintains the household's functional equilibrium. She is the family's social infrastructure, the person who maintains the relational fabric that allows everyone else to do whatever they do without the whole operation fraying completely. And she maintains this infrastructure through continuous, careful management of her own communication, through the ongoing practice of finding the words that will serve the present moment rather than the words that most accurately describe her experience of it. But underneath that managed surface, the show has consistently and carefully provided access to Marge's actual interior life. The things that don't get said, the wants that don't get expressed, the frustrations that don't get named. And what you find there, if you have been attending with sufficient care, is more complex and more troubled and more honestly rendered than almost anything else in the show's character work. Marge has a specific vocalization that has become one of the show's most recognized sounds. A long, low, worried groan that she produces at the moment. When something is clearly going wrong, when Homer has done something inadvisable, when Bart has committed some fresh act of chaos, when the situation is deteriorating in a direction she could see coming from several scenes ago and was hoping wouldn't arrive, but has now unmistakably arrived. Most viewers who have watched the show for any length of time process this sound as comedy. It is a reliable signal, as predictable as any musical cue, that the household is in a specific kind of trouble and that Marge is the person who has registered this fact. It gets laughs because of its familiarity, because of the way it frames the trouble as something the audience can recognize from their position of slight remove. But listen to the groan more carefully. Listen to it across a wide enough range of episodes that the specific quality of it becomes available to close attention. It is not a sound of surprise. Marge is almost never surprised by the things that produce the groan. The groan does not arrive at the moment of unexpected revelation. It arrives at the moment of expected confirmation, at the moment when what she has been tracking with the part of her attention that is always tracking the household's probable trajectories finally arrives at the outcome she has been watching it move toward. The groan is Marge saying, "I knew this was coming." The groan is Marge saying, "I have been here before. I have watched this specific sequence of events play out enough times that I can identify it early in its development and track its approach with reasonable precision. The groan is Marge saying, "I do not have the energy right now to perform surprise, because I have been not surprised by variations of this event for as long as I can remember, and performing surprise requires energy that the management of the consequence is going to require me to have available." It is the sound of parental and spousal weariness accumulated across years, made available as a single vocalization, compressed into something the show can use as a comedic beat while leaving intact the full weight of what it actually is. It is one of the most precise sounds of exhausted love in the history of television comedy, and the show uses it as a joke while giving it everything that makes it something more than a joke. Marge's cooking is a language the show uses to communicate her emotional state without ever explicitly discussing the communication. This is one of the show's most deeply embedded character choices, operating so far below the level of explicit narrative that most viewers register it as atmosphere rather than as deliberate storytelling. But if you watch the kitchen scenes across a wide enough range of episodes, the pattern is consistent enough to read as intentional rather than incidental. When Marge is content, when the household is operating in a register that she finds manageable and the relationships within it are in a place she can sustain, the food she makes is inventive. It expands. It shows the creative engagement of someone who has energy available beyond what the baseline function requires. She tries new things. She brings genuine curiosity to the task. The meals in these episodes have a quality of generosity that reflects the internal state of the person making them. When Marge is struggling, when the household is in a condition that is costing her more than the baseline management cost, when she is managing something difficult that has not been acknowledged or discussed, the meals become simpler, more functional, less decorated with the extra care that is available when the internal resources are not fully committed elsewhere. The cooking contracts toward necessity. The show does not label this. You do not receive any explicit guidance telling you to read the kitchen scenes as a barometer of Marge's emotional state. The information is there, but it requires the kind of attention that the show rewards for those who bring it, and it does not punish those who don't by making the information unavailable to them through any other channel. It is simply embedded in the character and the performance, available to be read or not, part of the show's texture whether or not the audience consciously engages with it. When Homer and the children sit down to a meal that has clearly involved more care than the occasion strictly required, they are, in a sense, they do not understand, receiving a message. Marge is telling them something through the food. They are not reading the message. The food is eaten, the dishes are cleared, the message remains unread, and Marge, who has sent it, returns to the kitchen and continues. There is one episode in the show's first decade that reveals Marge's capacity for seeing other people with a clarity that almost no one else in Springfield possesses, and the revelation arrives through the specific medium of painting. In the episode, Marge discovers a talent for visual art. She begins creating, and what she creates is genuinely accomplished, possessing the quality that separates work made by someone who can see from work made by someone who is technically proficient, but not truly observant. Her eye is real. Her capacity to translate what she sees into something communicable is real. These are not qualities that can be fully learned or practiced into existence. They require an underlying ability to observe without distortion, to see what is actually there rather than what you expect or want to be there. She paints Burns. This is the episode's central choice, and it is a choice that matters enormously for what the painting reveals. Burns is the town's most powerful figure, its most controlling presence, the entity around which Springfield's entire material existence is organized. He presents a public face that is the face of power, of authority, of the natural condition of things as they currently are. And Marge looks at this public face with her specific clarity and paints what she actually sees. The portrait reveals something that makes Burns uncomfortable, not flattering to him, not the self-image he has maintained across a century of being Charles Montgomery Burns. The painting sees through to something Burns has not consented to having seen, some quality of his actual inner life, or the absence of certain qualities, or the specific weight of what a century of his kind of power does to the person exercising it. Burns is disturbed by the painting. He wants it. He wants to control it. He cannot be at ease knowing that it exists in its current form, that there is an image of him that reflects what someone who saw him clearly chose to record. This episode is usually discussed as a story about Marge's artistic emergence and about Burns's predictable response to having his self-presentation complicated. But what it reveals about Marge is equally important and less often examined. She looks at the people around her and she sees them. She has been doing this for the entire run of the show, looking at Homer and seeing him, looking at the children and seeing them, looking at the neighborhood and the town and the situation she is in, and seeing it with the same clarity that her painting demonstrates. She has been the household's clearest observer of its own reality for 36 years, and the painting is the moment that skill becomes visible to anyone outside the household. The world's response to being seen clearly by Marge is to try to control what she does with the seeing. And Marge, who has developed her own relationship with what to do with what she sees across decades of navigating the gap between observation and expression, manages this response with the same careful diplomacy she brings to everything else. The show has addressed Marge's anxiety directly in several episodes, most substantially in the 9th season's Fear of Flying, where a fear of aircraft leads backward through a series of therapeutic discoveries to the specific origins of the anxiety in childhood experience and family dynamics. These episodes do something careful. They present Marge's anxiety not as a comic quirk or a plot device, but as a genuine psychological reality that has been shaping her behavior for years in ways she has not been fully conscious of, that has been limiting her in specific and traceable ways, that has costs she has been absorbing without fully naming them as costs. They also present the anxiety as something that her family, with the best possible intentions, has consistently made harder to address by treating it as a problem to be solved with energy and enthusiasm, rather than as an experience to be understood with patience and attention. Homer's response to Marge's anxiety is consistent across multiple episodes where it becomes relevant. He wants to fix it. He approaches it with the same quality of active, energetic, cheerful intention that he brings to everything, and this approach, which is genuinely well-intentioned, consistently fails to help, because what anxiety requires is not fixing, but witnessing. Not a solution, but an acknowledgement. And Homer, whose relationship with his own interior life is not organized around patient acknowledgement, is not equipped to provide what Marge's anxiety actually needs. So Marge has been managing her anxiety within a household that has not had the right vocabulary for it. She has developed her own management strategies, her own internal practices for working around and through the things that alarm her, and these strategies are largely invisible to the people around her, because they are internal processes that do not generate external behaviors that can be observed and commented on. Her patience, seen through this frame, is in significant part anxiety management. The calm she projects outward has been generated by a disciplined internal practice of keeping the anxiety below the surface, of managing the gap between the experience and the presentation. She is doing continuous work that nobody around her can see, and the work produces an effect that everyone around her depends on without understanding what generates it. This is the hidden cost of Marge's function. The patience is not free. The calm is not effortless. The managed communication requires continuous internal investment. And the show has been honest about this in its best episodes, in the moments when it lets us see inside the management system, in the scenes where the management fails and what Marge is actually experiencing becomes briefly visible to the world around her before the management reasserts itself and the surface closes over it again. Patty and Selma Bouvier are Marge's older sisters, and their function in the show is both comic and structural. They dislike Homer. This is one of the most consistent facts in the show's entire run. They have disliked Homer since before the show began, since the period of Marge and Homer's courtship that the show has revisited in multiple flashback episodes. Their dislike has never meaningfully modulated. It has not softened with time or familiarity or exposure to Homer's occasional genuine qualities. It has remained as stable as any fact the show maintains, and the show never fully settles whether they are wrong. It gives Homer his moments of genuine heroism, his demonstrations that the marriage contains real love and produces real meaning for both people in it, his episodes of showing that whatever his limitations, the thing he has with Marge, is genuinely valuable in ways that Patty and Selma's criticism does not account for. But it also gives Patty and Selma their moments of accurate observation that the narrative does not contradict. Their assessment of Homer's specific limitations and their specific effects on Marge's life is sometimes presented in ways that the show allows to simply be true without the correction of a redemptive Homer moment or the comedy of their being demonstrably wrong. The show holds both things simultaneously. And this ambivalence is the most honest position available to it on the subject. Patty and Selma are wrong about Homer in ways that matter for how you understand the marriage. They are also right about Homer in ways that matter for the same reason. And Marge is the person who has chosen to hold these two truths at the same time and to have made, and to keep making, the marriage her choice. Patty is eventually revealed to be gay, a revelation that is handled with the show's characteristic approach to character revelations. Comedy at the surface, genuine emotional content underneath, the two operating in the same space without canceling each other out. The revelation reframes aspects of her earlier characterization without invalidating them. Her relationship with the institution of marriage, her particular form of critical observation of the marriages around her, the specific quality of her presence in the show, all of these remain true and become slightly more textured after the revelation arrives. It also reframes her relationship with Marge in a subtle way. Two women who were, in their different ways, managing a gap between who they were and who the social environment they inhabited was prepared to accommodate. Marge managing the gap between her ambitions and her domestic role, between what she saw and what she could say about what she saw. Patty managing the gap between her identity and what the world around her was willing to recognize that identity as being. Both of them performing versions of themselves that were necessary rather than simply chosen. There is something in that parallel that the show does not state directly but has been building into their relationship for decades. Section 6. Bart's Chalkboard. The messages behind the messages. At the beginning of most episodes of The Simpsons, before the story starts, before the family gathers for the couch gag, before the episode's actual content takes hold of the broadcast, there is a single image that most viewers have stopped truly seeing because they have seen it too many times. A classroom, a single student, a chalkboard covered in a sentence that is being written repeatedly, line after line, the same words accumulating down the green surface as punishment for something Bart has done that the show is not going to explain. I will not carve gods. I will not hang donuts on my person. I will not prescribe medication. Organ transplants are best left to the professionals. The sentences accumulate across decades into a catalog that, read straight through, tells you more about Springfield than most of what happens in the episodes they precede. Not because the sentences are dense with narrative information, but because they imply events. Each sentence is the trace of a story the show never told. Each one is the consequence without the cause, the prohibition without the incident that made the prohibition necessary. Each one is a small window into the enormous unfilmed life that Springfield is living between episodes, the vast off-screen territory where Bart has apparently been doing things with organs and medications and carved gods that the school has found it necessary to address through the specific mechanism of repetitive writing. Let's spend some time with this, because the chalkboard is one of the most under-examined pieces of the show's ongoing project. The chalkboard gag was present in the very first episode the show broadcast. Bart writing a sentence on the board as punishment was one of the first images the show gave its audience, arriving in the opening credits sequence before the episode's story had begun. This is worth pausing on. The show introduced itself through a punishment. Its opening image was a child being disciplined by an institution for something he had done wrong, before the family was introduced, before Springfield was established, before any of the show's actual content had been presented. The first thing The Simpsons showed you was Bart at the chalkboard, writing the sentence, doing the thing the school required. This tells you what the show thought it was in those early days. It is a show organized around the relationship between a child's impulses and the institutional structures that respond to those impulses. Around the gap between what Bart does and what the school says he should have done instead. Around the specific experience of being required to perform contrition for something you do not feel contrite about, of going through the motions of the institutional response while maintaining the interior state that generated the incident in the first place. Bart's expression while writing the sentences is consistent across the entire run. It is never contrite. It is never the expression of someone who has genuinely processed why what they did was problematic and has arrived at the resolution not to do it again. It is the expression of someone who is enduring the requirement because the alternative is worse, who is doing the surface thing, the thing the institution can observe and record, while the interior state remains entirely unchanged. This is the chalkboard's fundamental joke, and it has been the joke since the first episode. The school believes that making Bart write sentences will change Bart. And Bart, with a consistency that spans 36 years and hundreds of sentences, has never changed. The sentences produce compliance. They have never produced the attitude change that compliance is supposed to signal. Bart writes the sentence and walks away the same person he was when he sat down. Reading through the chalkboard sentences as a continuous body of text, which is an experience that requires some effort but is available to anyone who chooses to undertake it, reveals several categories of sentence that tell you different things about the show and its preoccupations across different periods. The early sentences are grounded in the particular texture of childhood misbehavior that the show was exploring in its first seasons. They deal with specific institutional violations, disrupting class, misusing school property, various forms of the kind of trouble that a 10-year-old boy generates in a school environment that is not entirely equipped for the specific kind of 10-year-old boy Bart represents. These sentences feel like they were generated by an actual disciplinary process responding to actual events. They feel connected to a real institutional relationship between a specific student and a specific school. As the show develops through its middle seasons, the sentences become more elaborate, more capable of operating simultaneously on multiple registers, more interested in the comedy of implication rather than the comedy of directness. The sentences from this period are the ones that get quoted in discussions of the chalkboard's craft, the ones that have entered fan culture as particularly representative of what the gag can do when it is fully inhabited. In the later seasons, the relationship between the chalkboard sentences and the show's broader preoccupations shifts. Some sentences feel like they are reaching for the spirit of the gag without quite landing inside it. Others achieve something unexpected, a bite or a strangeness that reminds you what the form is capable of when it is being used with full attention. The quality is less consistent than in the middle period, but the inconsistency is itself informative. The chalkboard is a monitor. Its condition tells you something about the room it is in. The sentences that imply the strangest unfilmed events are the most interesting to sit with, because they require you to construct Springfield's off-screen life from very limited evidence. Nerve gas is not a toy implies not just that Bart obtained nerve gas at some point, but that he treated the nerve gas as a toy. That there was an episode in Springfield's ongoing story where a 10-year-old boy had access to a chemical weapon, and the school's response was to make him write sentences about the appropriate classification of nerve gas relative to the category of toys. Not to contact federal authorities, not to initiate any investigation into how a child obtained military-grade chemical agents, to assign sentences. Organ transplants are best left to the professionals, implies that there was a moment when Bart was involved in something that could be described as an organ transplant, performed without professional involvement, in a context the school was aware of and chose to address through the chalkboard. I will not prescribe medication implies a prescription, a specific, identifiable act of prescribing medication, which is a thing that requires specific knowledge and specific authority, and which Bart apparently had enough of at least one of to generate a sentence about it. What Springfield's off-screen life looks like, if you take the chalkboard sentences seriously as evidence of events that actually occurred within the show's canonical universe, is significantly stranger than what the episodes themselves depict. The sentences imply a Springfield that is running continuously, generating incidents, producing situations that require institutional response, living a life that is considerably more eventful than the life the camera manages to capture. The episodes are the sample. The chalkboard is the suggestion that the sample is not representative of the whole. The structural premise of the chalkboard gag is that a child violated a rule, and the violation generated a consequence from the institution that makes the rules. Skinner sent him to the board. The school required this specific form of repetitive writing as a mechanism for, presumably, some combination of punishment and conditioning. The institution has asserted its authority through the imposition of labor, and Bart is complying with the imposition. And Bart does comply. Every week, without exception, he is at the board, writing the sentence, doing the required thing. He is not refusing. He is not mounting active resistance. He is performing the institutional requirement with sufficient accuracy to discharge the obligation. But here is what the show has been consistently making visible for 3.5 decades. Compliance is not the same thing as being changed. The sentence is written. The requirement is met. The attitude that generated the incident remains unmodified. Bart writes, "I will not make flatulent noises in class 50 times," and then goes directly from the classroom to doing something that will generate a different flatulent sentence the following week. The institution measures compliance. It cannot measure what it cannot observe. And what is happening inside Bart while he writes the sentence is not something the institution can observe. This is the show's most sustained argument about a particular model of authority and consequence. The model that believes the performance of consequence produces genuine attitudinal change. That if you make someone do something enough times, they will internalize the principle behind the doing. Bart is the empirical counter-evidence, maintained across hundreds of individual data points, against this model. The sentence is written, the lesson is not learned. The system continues because the system cannot see the difference between writing the sentence and internalizing it. Bart is not a rebel in the grand sense. He is not mounting a principled campaign against the school's authority. He is not refusing the sentences or arguing against the institution's right to assign them. He is doing exactly what is required of him, meeting exactly the standard the institution has set, and the standard is not high enough to capture what the institution thinks it is capturing. The chalkboard is the show's most economical portrait of the gap between institutional requirements and genuine human change. The gap between what authority can demand and what authority can actually accomplish. And it has been making this portrait every week for 36 years. Section 7. The Treehouse of Horror as a Truth Machine. Every year, in October, The Simpsons produces a Halloween episode, The Treehouse of Horror, a collection of short stories in anthology format, disconnected from the main continuity, operating under a different set of rules from the episodes that surround it in the broadcast calendar, permitted to do things to the characters and to Springfield, and to the audience that the regular show cannot do within its established parameters. Characters die in ways that are not reversed. Characters transform into things they cannot transform back from. Characters encounter forces that the regular show's tone and its commitment to certain kinds of resolution cannot accommodate. The Treehouse of Horror is the show's designated space for excess, for the exploration of what lies underneath the cheerful surface of Springfield's ordinary existence, for the things that the comedy usually protects you from seeing directly. Most viewers experience it as a fun annual event, a holiday special with a particularly dark sense of humor. 3 short horror stories, generally more formally experimental than the regular episodes, a kind of gift to the audience who has been watching the regular show all year and might appreciate something that operates by different rules. This is an accurate description of what the Treehouse of Horror is on its surface. But the Treehouse of Horror is also something else. Something that the show has been doing with it since the very first Halloween episode in 1990 that most people do not quite articulate even after years of watching. The Treehouse of Horror is where the show tells the truth about Springfield, using the license of horror fiction to say things that the fiction of the regular show cannot directly accommodate. The most effective Treehouse segments are almost never about genuine external monsters. The tentacled things and the supernatural entities and the malevolent forces that arrive from outside Springfield to threaten its residents are, in the best segments, vehicles for something that was already present inside Springfield before the monster arrived. The segment where the family's house is alive and malevolent is not about haunted houses. It is about the relationship between a family and the domestic space it inhabits. The way a house can be a trap as much as a shelter. The way domestic life can feel, at certain angles and at certain moments, as if it is consuming the people inside it rather than protecting them. The house's malevolence in the segment is the extreme version of something that the regular show is always touching around the edges of. The segment where advertisements come to life and terrorize Springfield is not about advertising. It is about the degree to which commercial imagery has penetrated the collective imagination of a consumer society to the point where the imagery and the people consuming it are in a genuinely complicated relationship, where the commercial environment shapes the inner life of the people inside it in ways that feel less like choice and more like occupation. The monsters in this segment are made of the imagery that Springfield has been voluntarily absorbing, and when they become dangerous, it is the danger of something you invited in. The segment adapting The Shining is not about a haunted hotel. It is about Homer. It is about what Homer becomes when the external structures that normally keep his impulses within socially navigable limits are removed. The Shining, the Kubrick film, and the King novel both, is a story about what happens to a man when the things that normally contain his worst tendencies are taken away, and he is left alone with those tendencies and a family to impose them on. Homer's version of this is gentler, played for comedy more consistently than the source material, but the underlying structure is identical. And the reason the segment works is that it is not importing a horror structure into Springfield from outside. It is finding the horror structure that was already inside Homer and giving it a gothic hotel to operate in. In each case, the horror segment is a mirror. The frightening thing is not foreign to Springfield. It is native to Springfield, familiar to anyone who has been watching the regular show with any attention, and the horror segment is providing a form in which this familiar darkness can become visible rather than remaining submerged beneath the comedy's surface. The most significant structural difference between the Treehouse of Horror and the regular Simpsons is the availability of permanent consequence. In the regular show, nothing irreversible happens to the main characters. This is not a secret. It is a well-understood feature of the show's format. The floating timeline, the reset mechanism, the collective amnesia that allows Springfield to forget catastrophes between episodes, all of these operate to ensure that the main characters will be available and essentially unchanged for the following week's episode. The audience knows this. The knowledge shapes how they watch. There is always a layer of distance between the audience's emotional engagement with the episode's events and the full weight of those events, because the audience knows that whatever happens will be manageable, will be recoverable, will not permanently alter the fundamental situation. The Treehouse of Horror removes this layer of protection for approximately 22 minutes once a year. Homer dies in a treehouse segment. The segment continues. Homer remains dead. The story does not reverse itself to restore him, because the story is operating under different rules. Rules that permit permanent consequence and therefore require the audience to engage with what they are watching in a way that is slightly closer to how you engage with things that are actually happening. And what the audience feels in this engagement, the slight elevation of what might be called genuine concern for what is being shown them, rather than the comedy-adjacent processing that the regular show generates, is revealing. It is revealing about the audience's actual attachment to these characters. It is revealing about the degree to which the regular show's safety net has been allowing the audience to engage with the material at a slight remove. The deaths in the Halloween episodes demonstrate something important. You are more invested in this family than the regular show's format usually requires you to acknowledge. When the safety net is removed, even briefly, even in the context of a comedy horror anthology episode that everyone knows is non-canonical, you feel the exposure. And that feeling is the evidence of 36 years of relationship with these characters, accumulated below the surface of the laughing response. The show has adapted virtually the entire canon of horror fiction and film across its Treehouse episodes. It has worked with Stephen King and Alfred Hitchcock, and Edgar Allan Poe and H.G. Wells and Ray Bradbury and many others. It has engaged with universal monsters and contemporary horror, and science fiction dystopia and psychological thriller and body horror and cosmic horror. And in each case, the adaptation has found something in the horror material that resonates with Springfield's specific situation, something that the genre gives a shape to that the regular show cannot quite name. The best adaptations are not simply transplants of the genre story into a Springfield context. They are discoveries of the ways the genre story and Springfield story are actually the same story, told from different angles. The adaptations that do not work, the segments that feel like they are going through the motions of a genre exercise without finding what the genre and Springfield share, are equally informative. They tell you where the resonance runs out, where the horror tradition and the Springfield tradition stop illuminating each other. And these failures clarify by contrast what the successes are doing. The successes are not clever genre exercises. They are recognitions. The horror was already here. The genre just gave it a name. The Treehouse of Horror is explicitly designated as non-canonical. The show makes this clear in various ways across its history, through the framing of the anthology, through characters stepping outside the normal narrative frame to introduce or comment on the segments, through the general understanding that what happens in these episodes does not affect the continuity of the regular show, but this designation is slightly more complicated than it appears. The Treehouse of Horror has been part of The Simpsons' broadcast identity for over 3 decades. It has generated some of the most memorable and most discussed moments in the show's entire run. It has been absorbed into fan culture with a completeness that makes the canonical versus non-canonical distinction feel somewhat artificial in practice. And something interesting has happened across the long history of the Treehouse episodes. The distinctions that the show maintains between what is canonical and what is not canonical in the Halloween context have become gradually less legible to the audience. Viewers who have been watching the show for decades have, in many cases, developed memories that do not cleanly sort the Treehouse events from the canonical events. The Homer who died in a treehouse segment and the Homer who survived a canonical near-death experience live in the same audience memory, and the categorical distinction between them becomes less stable over time. Springfield's collective amnesia is one of the show's most consistent narrative mechanisms. The town forgets things. Events that should permanently alter the town's reality are absorbed and then released, and Springfield returns to its default state. The Treehouse of Horror, with its designated non-canonicity, is the show doing institutionally what Springfield does culturally. It is producing events and then releasing them, creating experiences that are marked as temporary, as contained within a designated space that does not connect to the continuous narrative. And the audience, over time, does with this the same thing Springfield's residents do with everything else that is designated for forgetting. They remember anyway, imprecisely, partially, with the canonical and non-canonical material blending together in ways that make the distinction increasingly hard to maintain. The Treehouse of Horror is non-canonical. Springfield remembers it anyway. And what Springfield remembers, whether it officially happened or not, shapes the town's ongoing reality. Section 8. Springfield's Hidden Economy. Money moves through Springfield in patterns that the show has been documenting for 36 years, and the picture it builds is one of the most precise and least discussed aspects of the entire series. Not because the show is shy about economic content, but because it embeds that content in comedy in ways that make it easy to receive as background color rather than as foreground argument. Springfield is a working-class and lower-middle-class town with specific economic pressures, specific economic relationships, and specific mechanisms through which wealth is generated and distributed, or, more accurately, generated and concentrated across its population. The show has never been naive about any of this. Its early seasons were organized explicitly around the Simpson family's economic situation. Homer's salary was a specific number. The cost of living in Springfield was something the show tracked with care. The family's financial decisions were grounded in real constraints that shaped what the characters could and could not do, what aspirations were and were not available to them. As the show moved through its middle seasons and into its later years, the grounding became less specific. Homer's salary became a number that the show mostly did not want to think too hard about, because thinking too hard about it would raise questions about the family's apparent economic capacity in various episodes. The financial texture became less precise, more flexible, organized around whatever the story needed rather than around the realistic economics of a specific household in a specific economic situation. But even as the specific grounding loosened, the broader economic architecture of Springfield remained visible for those who were attending to it. The structures through which wealth is generated and concentrated, the relationship between the town's single dominant employer and the rest of its economic ecosystem, the mechanisms of financial stress and economic insecurity that shape the decisions of Springfield's residents in ways that the comedy constantly touches but rarely examines directly. Homer Simpson works as a safety inspector at a nuclear power plant. In a second-season episode, his annual salary is given as a number that, measured against any reasonable assessment of what the job should pay and what the responsibility should require, is inadequate in ways that are initially surprising and then, on reflection, exactly what you would expect Burns to pay someone in Homer's specific situation. Homer is not being paid for competence. The safety record of the plant, the 342 violations that were documented and ignored, the ongoing leakage that the show has established as a continuous feature of the facility's operation. All of this makes clear that Homer is not performing the function his job title describes. He is performing the appearance of that function, and Burns is paying him not for actual safety management, but for being the specific person who will not manage safety in the specific ways that would threaten Burns's operation. A competent safety inspector would find the violations. A competent safety inspector would file reports. A competent safety inspector would create the institutional record that regulatory agencies could act on. Homer is paid to be in the role without doing what the role actually requires. This makes Homer's salary not a market rate for safety inspection, but a bribe rate for a specific kind of negligence. Burns has calculated what it costs to maintain the appearance of a safety infrastructure while ensuring that the infrastructure does not function in ways that would have consequences for him, and Homer's paycheck is that calculation expressed as a recurring line item. The interesting implication of this reading is that Homer's job security, which has been established as extraordinary given the number and quality of his documented errors, makes a different kind of sense. Homer is not kept employed despite his incompetence. He is kept employed because of it. His specific incompetence is the service Burns is purchasing. A more capable person in the role would be a liability rather than an asset. Moe's Tavern has been Springfield's primary drinking establishment since the first episode. Moe Sislak owns it, runs it, has organized his entire existence around it for longer than the show has been tracking his story. The tavern is economically implausible on its face. The show has acknowledged this through occasional jokes about sparse patronage, through storylines involving financial desperation, through the general texture of the place as somewhere that operates at the margin of commercial viability. A bar with Moe's observable customer base, in any realistic economic environment, would not sustain itself through the revenue those customers generate. The numbers do not work. The show has addressed this through various unofficial revenue streams introduced in storylines. Money laundering appears in at least one episode as a feature of Moe's economic reality. Under-the-table transactions of various kinds are implied in others. The tavern's economic survival is not explained entirely by the legal sale of alcohol to a small group of regular customers. But the more interesting economic fact about Moe's Tavern is not its financial ledger but its social function and the economic value of that function. Moe's is where Springfield's working men, specifically the cohort organized around Homer, bring their economic stress and dissolve it in a context that permits the stress to be present without requiring it to be addressed. Beer and company and the particular social permission of a space designed specifically for not thinking about it. The tavern does not solve the financial anxieties that Homer and Lenny and Carl and Barney bring through its door. It manages the psychological consequences of those anxieties long enough that the men can return to work the following morning without having fully processed what they are working in and for. This is the tavern's true economic function. It is a mechanism for absorbing and temporarily neutralizing the psychological byproducts of Springfield's economic structure. The resentment, the frustration, the specific kind of tired that comes from spending your working life in proximity to a facility that is visibly not what it presents itself as being, for an employer who has never learned your name. All of this arrives at Moe's door and is addressed through the application of alcohol and companionship and the specific social ritual of men sitting together, not talking about the things they are clearly feeling. Moe profits from Burns's operation in the most indirect possible way. He provides the service that allows Burns's workers to keep showing up without fully breaking down, the buffer between the plant's demands and the human limits of the people meeting those demands. Without Moe's, something would have to give. The men would have fewer places to decompress. The pressure would build without the release valve. Springfield would be a more volatile place, and Burns's operation would face more friction. Moe's Tavern is, in this reading, a structural component of Burns's economic dominance. One he did not design and does not control, but one that serves his interests by serving the men who serve him. The Quickie Mart occupies a specific and well-defined economic niche in Springfield, and the show has documented that niche with considerable precision across many episodes. Apu Nahasapi Mapetalan's convenience store is the place where things needed immediately, without advance planning, can be obtained at prices that reflect the specific premium on convenience. This is not an arbitrary economic position. It is a position that exists in response to a specific feature of its customer base. People who cannot afford to buy in bulk, who live from paycheck to paycheck in ways that make advance planning structurally difficult, who need what they need in the moment it is needed and are willing to pay the premium that immediate availability commands because the alternative, not having it at all, is worse. The Quick E-Mart serves the specific economic situation of Springfield's lower income and working class residents. It charges more per unit than a larger store would charge for the same product purchased in larger quantities. This is the convenience store economics that exists in every community organized around economic constraints that prevent bulk purchasing. It is a premium paid by people who are already paying more for everything as a structural consequence of not having enough resources to purchase in ways that reduce per unit cost. Apu works hours that the show establishes as extraordinary. He is at the store for most of the hours that the store is open, which is most of the hours that exist. He has structured his life around the operational demands of a business that requires continuous presence in ways that most businesses do not. His working hours define his waking experience to an unusual degree. And the store he has invested this time in, the Quickie Mart as a franchise institution, is not entirely his. It is part of a corporate franchise structure that means Apu operates with the appearance of independent proprietorship while actually serving as the local implementation of a corporate system that sets his terms, captures a portion of his revenue, and maintains the relationship on terms that the corporation rather than Apu determines. He is the face of the Quickie Mart in a way that the Quickie Mart corporate entity is not. He is the person the community interacts with, the person who knows his regular customers, the person who has the relationships. But the economic structure beneath the relationships is corporate rather than personal, and the distinction matters for what Apu actually owns and controls. The show also reveals, at various points in its run, that Apu is a person of genuine intellectual distinction who has been operating a convenience store for 20 years, not because it represented the best available use of his abilities, but because it was the option that was accessible to him when the options were being sorted. He has a doctorate. He has demonstrated intellectual range that extends well beyond retail management. He is, like Frink, like Eleanor Abernathy, like Arnie Pye, a person whose capacity significantly exceeds the role that Springfield's economic structure has made available to him. Springfield is very good at this. It takes people with more than it needs and puts them in positions that use less than they have. And the economic structure that does this is the same structure that Burns built and maintains. Section 9. The Couch Gag as Confession. Every episode of The Simpsons opens the same way. The opening measures of Elfman's theme. The Simpsons title card over the clouds. Bart at the chalkboard. The school hallway with Lisa on her saxophone. The family approaching 742 Evergreen Terrace from their respective directions. The run through the door. And then the couch. For the first several seasons, what happens on the couch is relatively simple. The family arrives and finds some physical variation on the normal seating arrangement. Someone is squashed, someone is missing. Someone is in the wrong place. The gag is brief and clean and moves immediately into the episode. As the show grows older, and the couch gag develops its own history and its own tradition, and its own reputation, as a designated space where the show can do something outside its normal parameters, the gag becomes something substantially more interesting and more formally ambitious. The couch gag is now understood as a legitimate creative opportunity. Directors and animators and outside artists have used it to make things that operate entirely independently of the episode they are preceding. Things that have their own aesthetic logic and their own emotional or political content. Things that would not exist anywhere except in this specific slot at the beginning of this specific show. It is a 2 to 30-second canvas that has generated some genuinely remarkable work. But the couch gag is also, at a level below the individual gag and above the individual episode, something that has been saying the same thing week after week for 36 years. Something that each individual gag expresses differently, but that all of them share as their common foundation. The structural logic of the couch gag is this. The family arrives. Whatever happens to them on the way, however strange or elaborate the journey, they end up in the same place. On the couch, together. In front of the television. This is the couch gag's fundamental statement, embedded in its structure before any specific content is added. The family arrives. The family is together. The television is on. This is the destination. Whatever else the show does or becomes or explores or examines, this is where it returns. Even in couch gags that seem to be making the opposite argument, couch gags where the family is destroyed on the way to the couch, where the couch itself is dangerous, where the normal order is inverted in ways that seem to deny the basic premise, the statement is still there. The family's arrival is the event. The togetherness is the destination, even when the destination is complicated or ironic or played for horror rather than warmth. The couch gag says, every single week, this is where they belong and this is where they are. And after 36 years of hearing this said, the audience has internalized it so completely that the couch itself has become one of the most effectively powerful objects in American popular culture. Not because it is beautiful or impressive or symbolically loaded in any conventional sense, but because it has been the family's destination for so long that its presence in the frame signals arrival, completion, the closing of the loop that the episode will spend its next 20 minutes opening. At some point in the show's middle period, certain directors and animators and outside artists began treating the couch gag as a genuine creative opportunity rather than a conventional opening element. The gag became longer, more elaborate, more willing to spend real time doing something that had its own internal logic before the episode began. These expanded couch gags are celebrated within fan culture and within the broader discussion of the show's craft because they represent the show giving a piece of its broadcast time to something that is not organized around the episode that follows. They are, in a real sense, short films that happen to be attached to the front of Simpsons episodes. Some of them are remarkable pieces of animation or formal experiment. Some of them are genuinely funny in ways that the regular episode may not match. Some of them are doing something stranger and more political than the regular show's format accommodates. The expanded couch gags also function as confessions of a different kind. When the couch gag becomes longer than many regular scenes, when it exceeds the expected boundary of what the couch gag is supposed to be, it is signaling something about the show's relationship with its own conventional format. It is saying that the things worth exploring sometimes do not fit inside the established container. It is acknowledging that the episode format, which has served the show for 36 years and which has become one of the most reliable containers in American television, is not the only possible container. There are things to say that require more than it provides, or different than it provides, and the expanded couch gag is one mechanism for saying them. The show has invited outside directors and artists and animators to produce couch gags, and these contributions are, almost without exception, darker and stranger and more politically willing than the regular show's own production tends to be. This makes sense. An outside contributor to a single opening sequence does not bear the same responsibility for the ongoing relationship between the show and its audience that the regular production team bears. They can use the space to say something without needing to maintain the relationship with the audience through the episode that follows. They can push harder. They can be more uncomfortable. They can occupy the couch gag with content that the regular show would not place in the episode proper. And the show, by issuing these invitations and broadcasting the results, is doing something sophisticated and perhaps slightly cowardly but ultimately interesting. It is creating a mechanism for saying things it cannot say through its own voice. The outside artist's statement becomes, through being placed in The Simpsons opening, a statement that The Simpsons is making. But the show can maintain plausible deniability about the full weight of the statement because the production was outside the normal chain of creative responsibility. The most pointed of these collaborations have used the couch gag to address the conditions of the show's own production and distribution, the industrial and economic context in which Springfield exists. These are perhaps the most honest moments the show has produced. Moments where the fiction pauses, and something about the reality of what making and distributing a television show involves is allowed to become visible. They do not last long. The episode begins immediately after, and the fiction resumes. But the couch gag said something, and the something is there in the record of the show's broadcast history. There is a category of couch gag organized around the death or transformation of the main characters, segments in which the family arrives at the couch having undergone something that should be permanent and irreversible, and then the episode begins with them restored to their default state. These gags compress the show's fundamental formal mechanism into its shortest possible expression. The mechanism is, something happens. The default state is restored. Everything continues. The gag demonstrates this mechanism operating at maximum speed, showing you the full cycle in less than 30 seconds. Something permanent happens to the characters. The episode begins. The permanent thing is gone. This is what the show does across its entire run. Events occur, some of them genuinely significant, and they are absorbed and released, and the default state reasserts itself. The death couch gags are not mocking this mechanism. They are demonstrating it with the clarity that compression provides, making visible what is usually hidden in the larger scale of the episodic format. When Homer dies in a couch gag, and the episode begins with Homer alive, the couch gag has shown you the reset button. It has made the machinery visible, and having seen the machinery, you watch the episode with a slightly different relationship to what is happening in it, aware at some level of the underlying structure that will absorb whatever the episode does and release the characters back to their default state by the closing credits. The couch gag that has never been made is this. The family arrives. They sit down. Nothing happens. No joke, no twist, no formal experimentation or genre subversion or outside artist statement. Just the family on the couch, in the living room, with the television on, the simplest possible version of the thing. This couch gag has never been made because it would be, paradoxically, the most formally daring of all the couch gags. It would be the couch gag that refuses to be a joke, that presents the family's togetherness without any comedic frame, that says directly what every other couch gag has been saying through indirection. The family is on the couch. That is the whole thing. That has always been the whole thing. But the show cannot say this directly. The direct statement would be too exposed, too vulnerable, too nakedly committed to the emotional claim without the protective distance of comedy or formal experiment. The show has been making this statement for 36 years through every possible oblique approach, through gags that circle around it from every direction, and it cannot quite bring itself to make it straight. Which is perhaps appropriate, because the show's relationship with the truth of its own emotional content has always been this slightly indirect, this slightly protected by comedy, this committed to finding ways to say the thing without being too directly seen to say it. The couch gag that has never been made is the couch gag the show has been building toward for 3.5 decades. The one that would require the show to be completely without armor. The one that would say, simply, without anything around it, the family is here. This is what we love. This is what we have always been about. Someday perhaps? But not yet. Section 10. The secondary Simpsons: Herb Powell, Patty and Selma, and Abe. There is a version of the Simpsons story you have not quite seen, even if you have watched every episode multiple times. Not the version where Homer stumbles through disasters and the family survives intact. Not the version where Springfield does its characteristic dance of crisis and amnesia and reset. The version that runs alongside that one, in the spaces between episodes and in the characters who orbit the family without quite belonging to its core, who carry the weight of what the Simpson family could have been and might have been and was, before the show started and after the camera moves away. The secondary Simpsons are the characters related to the main family by blood or marriage, who exist at a remove from its daily life, who represent what the Simpson family looks like from angles the central characters cannot quite see themselves. And each of them, in their particular way, is carrying a version of the story that the show's primary narrative does not have room to tell fully. Herbert Powell is Homer's half-brother. He exists in 2 episodes and then does not appear again. And in those 2 episodes he accomplishes something that no other single character in the show manages quite so cleanly. He shows Homer what Homer could have been. Herb is the son of Homer's father by a different woman. He was given up for adoption at birth. He grew up without the Simpson family, without Abe's specific influence, and without the specific environment of Springfield that has shaped Homer in every way that Homer is shaped. He grew up somewhere else, in different circumstances, with different inputs, and he became what those different circumstances produced: a successful man, the head of a major automobile manufacturing corporation. Wealthy, professionally accomplished, operating at a level of achievement that Springfield's economic conditions and environmental effects make essentially impossible for the people who grow up and stay in it. The episode in which Homer and Herb discover each other is one of the show's most emotionally complex treatments of class and mobility, and the difference between the life you have and the life you might have had if the variables had been different. Herb has everything that conventional measurement calls success. He has the resources and the professional standing and the accomplishment, and he has none of what Homer has. He has no family, no warm chaos, no person who loves him in the specific, unconditional, complicated way that Marge loves Homer. He has achievement without the domestic warmth that achievement is, for many people, supposed to ultimately purchase. When Herb finds Homer, and through Homer the Simpson household, he responds to it with something that the show depicts as genuine hunger. He wants what is in that living room. He wants the realness of it, the mess and the noise and the warmth of it, the fact that it is unmistakably and irreducibly alive in the way that his achieved life is not. Homer, meanwhile, looks at Herb and sees the other direction, sees what the other path produced, and feels the gap between what he is and what Herb represents with the specific poignancy of someone who is looking at the road not taken from a sufficient distance to see it whole. The episode then does something that complicates the emotional arithmetic it has been building. Homer designs a car for Herb's company, applying his specific relationship with consumer desire and his general absence of inhibition, and the car is a catastrophe. It bankrupts Herb's company. The reunion between the brothers becomes also the destruction of one of them, not through malice or negligence, but through Homer being exactly what he is, which includes being someone whose judgment cannot be trusted with the decisions that Herb entrusted to him. The resolution, which comes in the 2nd episode and involves Herb recovering his fortune through an invention of his own, provides the narrative closure the 1st episode's damage required. But the damage is in the record. Homer's impact on Herb was real and it was significant, and the second episode's restoration does not entirely erase the first episode's destruction. What Herb Powell does for the show in his 2 appearances is provide the existence proof that Homer's limitations are not inevitable. The biological material that became Homer, given different circumstances, different environment, different shaping forces, produced a different outcome entirely. Herb is Homer with the Springfield variable removed. And Herb is capable, intelligent, professionally accomplished, functional in ways that Homer is not. Which is the show's most direct statement about what Springfield has done to Homer. Not just as a joke, not as a plot convenience, but as a genuine claim about the relationship between environment and human capacity. Homer is what Springfield produces. Herb is what the same person becomes when Springfield's specific effects are not applied. Patty and Selma Bouvier are Marge's older sisters, and they occupy a specific and complex structural role in the show. They hate Homer. This is one of the show's most durable facts. They have hated Homer since before the first episode, since the period of courtship and early marriage that the show has reconstructed in various flashback episodes across its run. Their dislike has not modulated. It has not been worn away by proximity or time or the accumulated evidence of Homer's occasional genuine qualities. It sits exactly where it sat in the beginning. And as we noted in the section on Marge, the show never fully settles whether their judgment is wrong. It gives Homer the evidence against their position. It gives Patty and Selma evidence for their position. And it allows Marge to exist in the space between making and remaking the choice of her marriage with a complexity that neither straightforward endorsement nor straightforward rejection of the sisters' view could accommodate. Patty and Selma work at the Springfield Department of Motor Vehicles. They have worked there for the entire run of the show. The DMV is one of American civic culture's most reliably satirized institutions, the place where bureaucratic indifference and procedural inflexibility and the specific power of the minor official to make someone's day worse are most concentrated and most legible. Their employment there is not incidental. It places them in the specific kind of institutional role that gives people just enough power to be frustrating without enough power to be truly significant. They have hobbies and interests that the show has documented across decades. They smoke, consistently and heavily, with a commitment to the habit that the show uses as a visual signature and that functions as a kind of armor. A thing they do that is definitively theirs, that does not require anyone else's participation or approval. They are fans of a fictional actor named MacGyver, whose appeal to them the show treats as a running joke but which, examined with a certain sympathy, reveals something about what they are looking for in the stories they choose to inhabit. The man who solves impossible problems with what is available to him. The man who makes what he needs from what is there. The fantasy, for 2 women who have made their lives work with what was available to them, of a protagonist who is defined entirely by resourcefulness. Patty's sexuality, revealed later in the show's run, reframes her relationship with the institution of marriage, and her specific quality of critical observation toward Homer and Marge's marriage, without invalidating the relationship she has had with those subjects throughout the show's history. Her critique of the marriage is not simply the critique of someone who did not have what Marge has and resents it. It contains within it the perspective of someone for whom marriage itself was a different kind of institution, one whose terms were organized around presumptions that did not include her. The Bouvier sisters are the show's portrait of a certain kind of female life in a certain kind of American moment. Capable, employed, independent in the specific ways that their circumstances have made independence available to them, and also constrained, also limited by the specific expectations and opportunities of their world, also managing the gap between who they are and what the world around them was organized to recognize. Abraham Simpson is the character who holds the show's most significant secret. He is Homer's father. He is old. He is an unreliable narrator by his own admission and by the evidence of his frequent contradictions. He tells stories that wander away from their subjects. He references historical events with the specific, confident inaccuracy of someone who was there but whose memory of being there has been substantially revised by time and self-interest. He exists in the show primarily as a figure of elder comedy, deployed when the narrative needs someone to represent the social position of the very old in a household and community that is generally not quite sure what to do with them. And he is the person who knows. He knows about Mona. He knows what happened to Homer's mother, knows that she is alive, knows why she left and why she could not return, knows the history that Homer has been living without access to for the entire period that the show covers. He showed Homer a stranger's gravestone. He constructed the fiction of a dead mother around his son and maintained it for 30 years. The show eventually gives Abe the opportunity to explain himself across the various episodes that address the Mona storyline and its aftermath. And the explanation is one of the show's most interesting treatments of the kind of choice that seems manageable in the moment it is made and reveals its full cost only across the decades that follow. Abe told Homer his mother was dead because the truth was complicated and painful, and because Abe was not equipped to explain it in ways that would help Homer rather than devastate him. Because the truth required talking about Burns, and talking about Burns required acknowledging his own entanglement with Burns, and acknowledging his own entanglement required examining choices Abe had made that he was not proud of. The lie was simpler. The lie maintained the surface. The lie required only one ongoing decision, which was to continue not correcting it. And Homer grew up inside the lie, grew up believing he was the kind of son a mother would prefer to leave rather than be near. Grew up with the specific wound that maternal abandonment leaves, the conviction that there is something fundamentally unlovable about you, that the most important person in the world to a child made a calculation about him and found him insufficient. This wound shaped everything about Homer that the show has documented. His desperate need for approval, his clinginess, his terror of being left, his willingness to absorb humiliation and mistreatment rather than risk losing the stable thing he has. Abe gave Homer this wound, not with cruelty but with the specific kind of parental cowardice that the show treats with more sympathy than most of its content about adult failures receives. Abe was afraid to tell the truth. He told a different story instead. And the different story became Homer's understanding of himself, and Homer built himself around it. The deal that Abe made with Burns, the agreement that secured Homer's permanent employment at the power plant in exchange for Abe's silence about something Burns had done, is the show's most explicit connection of these threads. Abe made a deal with the man who had destroyed Homer's family. He traded his silence for his son's economic security. He thought he was protecting Homer. What he was doing was ensuring that Homer would spend his adult life employed by the man who had taken his mother away from him, without ever knowing the connection, without ever having the information that would allow him to understand his own situation. This is the show's most sustained and most devastating portrait of the way one person's choices can shape another person's entire existence, without the shaped person ever knowing the shaping is happening. Homer is the person Abe's choices made him. The crayon and the radiation and the specific texture of Homer's psychology are all downstream of a decision Abe made when Homer was 6 years old and his mother kissed him goodbye while he was sleeping. Abe sits in his nursing home and tells his stories that wander away from their subjects. And the subject he never quite reaches, the one that all the other stories are circling around, is the one where he told his son his mother was dead and lived inside that choice for 30 years and never found the moment to correct it. And here, at the far end of 4 hours in Springfield, in the quietest part of wherever you are, with the night settled in around you, is the thing that all of it has been pointing toward. The theories are real. The hidden structures are there. The music carries things the dialogue cannot say. The house changes shape depending on who is in it. The manor observes everything. Marge says more than she says. The chalkboard accumulates evidence of a Springfield that keeps happening off-screen. The treehouse tells truths the regular show cannot accommodate. The economy explains the politics, and the politics explain the contamination, and the contamination explains the memory loss, and the memory loss explains why nothing ever quite changes. All of this is real and worth knowing. But underneath all of it, underneath every theory and every hidden structure and every coded message and every piece of the architecture that the show has built across 36 years and 800 episodes, there is the simplest thing. The thing the couch gag has been saying every single week. The thing that Herb saw when he walked into the Simpson living room and felt something he had not felt in his achieved, accomplished, fully realized other life. The family is here, together, on the couch, with the television on and the beer cold and the children making noise somewhere above the living room, and Marge in the kitchen sending messages through the food and the night outside, doing what nights do when the people inside are safe. This is what Springfield is protecting. This is what the reset button and the floating timeline and the collective amnesia are all in service of. Not protecting a flawed billionaire's empire, though they do that too. Not protecting a contaminated town's denial of its own situation, though they do that as well. At the level below all of those things, at the level where the show lives in its audience's memory across decades, the protection is for this. The family on the couch. The ordinary life. The thing that Homer is dreaming about, if he is dreaming. The thing worth coming back to every Sunday. The thing worth building Springfield around, and filling it with 300 characters and running it for 36 years and never quite letting it end? The family is here. That has always been the whole thing. Sleep well. Thank you for 4 hours in Springfield. If tonight was exactly what you needed, subscribe, and we'll be here next time with more. The family will be on the couch. They always are. End of script. Section 11. The Simpsons' relationship with time. Every theory. One thread. By this point in the night, if you have been drifting in and out, letting the words wash over you the way this kind of watching is supposed to work, you have absorbed something important, even if you have not been holding it consciously. Every section of what we have been exploring, the background characters and the music and the house and the manor and Marge's silence and the chalkboard and the horror episodes and the economy and the secondary family, all of it keeps returning to the same central mystery, the one that sits underneath every other mystery the show generates. Time does not work in Springfield, not in the literal sense that the show is defective or inconsistent, though it is both of those things in specific and easily documented ways. In the deeper sense that the show has constructed a world whose relationship with time's ordinary passage is genuinely and fundamentally broken, and has done so with enough intentionality that the breakage begins to look like a feature rather than a bug, like the point rather than the problem. Bart Simpson was 10 years old when the show began in 1989. He is 10 years old right now, in whatever year you are watching this. The gap between those two statements, the 36 years that have passed in the world while Bart remained 10, is one of the strangest facts in American entertainment. A character has been 10 years old for longer than most of his current audience has been alive. He has watched American culture change more times than most 10-year-olds encounter cultural change and remained unchanged himself, frozen at the moment of his initial presentation to the audience. The industry term for this is a floating timeline, and the existence of this technical term makes it possible to process the phenomenon without fully registering what it means. The floating timeline is how animated shows work. It is a convention of the form. It allows the show to always feel current, to have characters who exist in the present moment of whoever is watching, rather than in a fixed historical period that recedes further into the past with each passing year. You do not need to know that Bart is canonically a child of the late 1980s to enjoy an episode set in 2025. The show stays contemporary, and Bart stays 10, and everything flows forward while the character stays put. But The Simpsons has been running long enough that the floating timeline has created consequences that transcend the usual category of animation convention. It has been running long enough that the gap between Bart's stated age and the number of years that have passed since his introduction is not a few years but multiple decades. It has been running long enough that the characters' backstories, which were originally grounded in specific historical periods, have had to be completely revised multiple times as the timeline floated forward and their implied birth years moved with it. Homer and Marge met in high school in the late 1970s, then in the mid-1980s, then in the early 1990s, then in the late 1990s, then in the 2000s. The story of how they met has been told at least 4 times in significant flashback episodes, and each version places their formative years in a different decade, adjusting the cultural references and the setting and the specific texture of the young Homer and Marge experience to match whatever decade is approximately 35 years prior to the current broadcast year. Their origin story is not a fixed narrative. It is a template that gets re-rendered with each generation of retrospective episode, maintaining the emotional content while replacing the cultural specifics. This means that Homer and Marge do not have a past. They have a series of approximate pasts, each of which was true in the year it was produced and none of which is simply true across the show's entire run. Their memories are unstable in a way that the show normalizes through the convention of the floating timeline, but that, held at arm's length and examined as a phenomenon rather than accepted as convention, is genuinely strange. The people at the center of the show have unreliable memories of their own origin stories. They know they met, they know they fell in love, they know they had children. But the specific texture of when and where and in what cultural context these things happened shifts according to when you are asking the question. Springfield's residents do not have fixed pasts. They have adjustable ones, updated periodically to maintain their relationship to a moving present. Every major theory about Springfield arrives at the floating timeline from a different direction, and what is remarkable is that they all arrive at essentially the same destination. The radiation theory says that the biological effects of chronic nuclear contamination have altered the cellular aging processes of Springfield's residents in ways that prevent normal senescence. The mutation that gives the residents 4 fingers and yellow skin and eyes that bulge has also, at the cellular level, interrupted the mechanisms that would normally produce aging and decline. They are not aging because their biology has been fundamentally altered by decades of environmental exposure. The floating timeline is a biological symptom rather than a narrative convention. The coma theory says that nobody ages because they exist inside the frozen mind of an unconscious man. Homer Simpson went into a coma in April 1993 and has never emerged. The world of the show that we have been watching since that date is the dream that his unconscious mind is generating from the memory material available to it. And memory does not age the people it contains. Memory preserves. Memory keeps the people you love in the moment you last saw them, holds them there with the specific permanence that real time cannot provide. Homer's children do not age because Homer was not there to watch them age. His memory cannot give them something it does not have. The collective denial theory says that Springfield does not age because the town has collectively agreed not to. The same civic mechanism that voted to exile the real Seymour Skinner and criminalize the truth of his identity, the same social contract that requires Springfield to forget catastrophes between episodes, extends to time itself. Aging implies change. Change implies acknowledging that the past was different from the present. Acknowledging that the past was different from the present means confronting the accumulated evidence of what has happened in Springfield since the first episode. And that evidence, the contamination and the deception, and the compromised civic institutions and the billionaire who has been poisoning the water for decades, is evidence that Springfield has decided it cannot afford to examine. So Springfield does not age, by collective agreement, by the same mechanism that has been operating since the first episode to maintain the town's relationship with comfortable fiction rather than uncomfortable truth. The Burns immortality theory contributes a different angle. If the concept of aging is already negotiable in Springfield's universe, if one of its residents has found the combination of wealth and technology and medical intervention that allows him to extend his life far beyond what biology would normally permit, then the temporal rules of this universe are already established as more flexible than the temporal rules of the world outside the show. Burns is living proof that time's normal operation can be interrupted by sufficient resources applied in the right way. The floating timeline is not violating the universe's rules. It is operating according to rules that Burns has already established as part of this universe's fundamental nature. And the prediction theory, which we touched on in the source material, offers the most unsettling version of the temporal argument. If The Simpsons has been accurately anticipating future events with sufficient frequency to have become culturally known as a predictive show, then its relationship with time may be the inverse of what the floating timeline suggests. Rather than being a show that is frozen in time, unable to move forward, it may be a show that is seeing in multiple directions simultaneously, that exists in a temporal position from which the ordinary linear sequence of past, present, future is not quite as binding as it is for everyone watching it. These theories are using different evidence and different logical frameworks to arrive at the same place. Time does not work normally in Springfield. And the reason this is true is simultaneously all of these things and none of them cleanly, because the show is large enough and has been running long enough that multiple explanatory frameworks can all find genuine support in its material. What would it actually mean if time worked in Springfield? This is the question the show has answered through the flash-forward episodes, and the answer is one of the most emotionally powerful things the show has ever produced. In Lisa's Wedding, which aired in Season 6, the show presents a vision of Springfield and the Simpson family approximately 15 years into the future. Lisa is in her early 20s. She is engaged to be married. She has become, in the way the show has always suggested she would become, someone of considerable intelligence and professional accomplishment who is also lonely and searching and not entirely at peace with the version of herself that accomplishment has produced. Homer in this future is older in ways that the show renders with genuine tenderness. He has aged. He has the specific qualities that aging gives people: a softening, a loosening of the urgency that youth requires, a willingness to be exactly what he is without the defensive energy that younger Homer requires to maintain his self-presentation. He is more vulnerable. He is more openly loving. He is the father that the regular series Homer is always trying to be, but whose age and energy and social defensiveness prevent him from being with complete consistency. The episode's emotional peak is a scene between future Homer and present Lisa, a scene about the relationship between fathers and daughters, and the specific way that this relationship changes over time without losing what it essentially is. It is one of the finest scenes the show has ever produced. It is the show at its most directly committed to the emotional content it is carrying, without irony, without the comedic protection that usually surrounds this kind of material. And then it ends. Lisa returns to the present. Homer returns to being the Homer of the regular series. The flash-forward closes, and the permanent present resumes, and Bart is 10, and Lisa is 8, and Homer is however old Homer is, and the family is on the couch. The show showed you what time would do to this family if time were allowed to operate. And what it would do is beautiful and sad and real. The relationship between Homer and Lisa does not diminish with time. It deepens. The love does not reduce. It becomes more itself. Homer becomes, in the flash forward, the specific version of Homer that the regular series has always been building toward without being able to arrive at. And the show cannot let this arrive. It can visit the arrival. It can show it to you for the duration of a single episode. But it cannot let the floating timeline stop floating, because the arrival means the story ends, and the story ending means acknowledging that 36 years have passed, that the family is older than the show is willing to let them be, that the couch at 742 Evergreen Terrace is occupied by adults now, and the children who used to fill the house with noise are somewhere else living their own stories. Springfield keeps time broken because the alternative, a Springfield where time works, is a Springfield where the Simpsons are no longer the Simpsons, where the story is over. There is a version of the floating timeline argument that is not about the show at all. That is about us. We are the ones who press pause. We are the ones who have, through 36 years of consistent viewership and cultural engagement and reruns and streaming, and the specific ongoing relationship between an audience and a show that has lasted longer than most of the audience's adult lives, created the demand that the floating timeline serves. The Simpsons cannot age because the audience does not want them to age. Not because the audience is childish or resistant to change, but because the family at 742 Evergreen Terrace represents something that most of us cannot access in ordinary life. A certain warmth, a certain constancy, a certain quality of home that is organized around love and chaos and the resilience of people who are deeply imperfect but deeply committed to each other. We have most of us lost, by the time we are adults, the specific domestic world that the Simpson household represents. The children who lived in houses like this have grown up and moved away. The parents who created those houses are older or gone. The houses themselves have been sold or renovated or simply changed from what they were when they were the center of a family's daily experience. And The Simpsons goes on. The house at 742 Evergreen Terrace is still there. Homer still drives his car. Marge still cooks. The kids are still the kids. Every Sunday night, or whenever you choose to watch, the family is present and available and exactly as you remember them. Not because nothing has changed, but because the show has committed to holding the thing that most of our actual lives have not been able to hold. The floating timeline is a service. We did not articulate the need for it, and the show did not announce that it was meeting a need. But across 36 years of mutual engagement, the show and its audience arrived at an arrangement that serves both. The show continues to exist and to generate creative work, and the audience continues to have access to a version of home that time has taken from them in every other context. The loop is ours. We built it, as the source material says. We press pause. We keep Bart 10 years old. We keep the beer cold. We keep the family on the couch. Because if they age, if the story ends, if the floating timeline lands and the family is suddenly and permanently older than we remember them being, we have to acknowledge that we are older too. That the years between the first episode and this one have happened to us as surely as they would have happened to Bart and Lisa if we had let them. That the distance between who we were when we first watched this show and who we are now is real, and it is significant, and the world we inhabited then has not been preserved anywhere except inside the show. The Simpsons is the one place where 1,000 989 is not gone, where the world that the show's first audience inhabited has been maintained in continuous operation, updated at the surface but preserved in its essential character, available to anyone who wants to return to it. We return because we want to visit that world, because we want to sit on the couch with the family and feel the specific comfort of a place that has always been available, that has never moved, that has been waiting for us every time we came back. Springfield's frozen time is our gift to ourselves, and the show has been accepting the gift and building with it for 36 years. Section 12. The Simpsons' secret relationship with death. The Simpsons never ends. This is one of its defining facts, the thing that separates it from virtually every other story of comparable scope and ambition. Stories end. Characters die. Arcs complete. The narrative arrives at a place of resolution and the storytelling stops. This is how stories work. This is how meaning is made in narrative. Through the closing of the loop, the arrival at the destination, the moment when the accumulated weight of everything that came before finally lands in a specific place, and the story is done. The Simpsons does not do this. It has not done this. It may never do this. Or it may do it eventually in ways that the show has been building toward for 3 decades. Or it may simply stop one day without a formal ending, without the closure that 36 years of storytelling should probably generate. But the show's avoidance of ending does not mean the show avoids death. Death is everywhere in Springfield. It arrives constantly, in various forms, with various levels of comedic protection, and the show has developed an elaborate and sophisticated relationship with mortality that operates largely below the surface of its comedy, but is available to anyone who looks for it. The most visible version of death in the show is Hans Moleman's recurring death. We have touched on this before, but it deserves the longer examination it has not received. Hans Moleman dies. He has been dying since the show's early seasons. He dies in canonical episodes, not in treehouse segments or dream sequences or other explicitly designated non-canonical zones. He dies in the main body of the show, during regular episodes, in scenes where death is presented as an actual event rather than a comedic metaphor. And then he appears in subsequent episodes alive, without explanation, without resurrection narrative, without acknowledgement from any other character that the man standing in the background of this scene was dead 2 episodes ago. The show has killed Hans Moleman more times than any other character in American animated television history. By conservative estimate, he has died dozens of times. By liberal count, the number may be approaching 100 across the show's full run. He has been hit by cars, crushed by objects, buried alive, eaten by animals, struck by lightning, burned, frozen, drowned, and subjected to a range of other fatalities that would individually be catastrophic and collectively represent a scope of mortal misfortune that no actual person could survive even partially. And he keeps coming back. The show's initial presentation of this as a running gag has a specific comedic logic. Moleman is physically fragile, nearly blind, prone to finding himself in the path of whatever is going to be dangerous in any given scene. His repeated deaths are the punchline of a joke about a specific character type, the accident-prone background figure who exists to suffer for the audience's amusement. But here is the thing about the gag that extends beyond its comedic surface. It has been running for 3 decades. It has accumulated to a scale where the sheer quantity of it begins to demand a different kind of attention than any individual instance receives. Hans Moleman has died dozens of times and returned each time without explanation. Within the show's normal continuity, this is presented as nothing remarkable. No other character comments on the pattern. No investigation is initiated. No institutional response to the repeated deaths of a community member is triggered. Springfield watches a man die over and over again and continues, unremarkably, as if this is simply the condition of things. The radiation theory offers one explanation. Moleman represents the most extreme visible effect of Springfield's environmental contamination. His apparent age, which he has stated to be 31 years old in one episode, while appearing to be in his 80s or 90s by any visual measure, suggests catastrophic rapid aging that is consistent with the most severe effects of chronic radiation exposure. And his capacity to recover from death, if that is what is happening, represents a biological adaptation to an environment so hostile that the normal mechanisms of mortality have been altered in ways that make death itself temporary rather than permanent. The coma theory offers a different explanation. Moleman is a background process in Homer's dream, a figure that Homer's unconscious mind deploys to populate Springfield's scenes without investing him with the continuity that the central characters require. When Molman dies, it is the dream editing him out of a scene. When he reappears, it is the dream reassigning the background process to a new scene. He is not a character with a continuous existence in Homer's dream. He is a recurrent element, generated as needed, without the narrative continuity that genuine dream characters maintain. The collective denial theory offers perhaps the most unsettling explanation. Molman dies in public, visibly, in front of witnesses, repeatedly, and nobody acknowledges this. The same social mechanism that voted to exile the real Seymour Skinner, that has collectively agreed to forget every catastrophe that happens in Springfield, has extended its operation to encompass one man's continuous mortality. Springfield has decided not to notice that Hans Molman keeps dying. It has added this to the very long list of things that are too inconvenient, or too disturbing, or too structurally threatening to the community's understanding of itself to be allowed to remain in collective awareness. Molman is 31 years old and looks like this. Something has happened to him. Something has been happening to him repeatedly in public for decades, and the town has organized its collective attention to look at everything except the obvious fact of it. The show's relationship with the deaths of recurring characters who are not part of the main family is one of its most complex ongoing projects. Dr. Nick Riviera has died. Sideshow Bob has attempted murder repeatedly and been convicted multiple times and released, and has somehow maintained a continuous relationship with Springfield society despite this record. Mayor Quimby has survived political scandals that should end any political career and continues to govern. Chief Wiggum has presided over a police department whose failures are so consistent and so comprehensive that they should have generated sustained institutional accountability long before now. These characters persist despite having done or experienced things that should, in any world operating under normal rules of consequence, have removed them from the field. They persist because Springfield's consequence architecture is broken. The social, legal, and political mechanisms that would, in a normally functioning community, produce accountability and change and consequence for actions are not operating reliably in Springfield. They operate intermittently when the story requires them, and then they stop operating and the default state reasserts itself. Dr. Nick is the most interesting case. He is a doctor of genuinely catastrophic incompetence. His medical interventions are actively dangerous. People have died under his care. People have been harmed. And he continues to practice medicine in Springfield because the town's medical regulatory infrastructure is either non-functional or operating under the same influence that makes every other regulatory infrastructure non-functional, which is the economic and political dominance of Burns, who has reasons to want Springfield's oversight institutions to be weak. A town with a functioning medical regulatory authority would not have Dr. Nick. A town with a functioning environmental regulatory authority would not have a river full of three-eyed fish. A town with a functioning political accountability structure would not have Mayor Quimby. The specific catalog of institutional failures in Springfield is not random. It follows from the presence of a single entity with sufficient power and sufficient interest in weak oversight to have actively cultivated that weakness across decades. Burns has not simply allowed Springfield's institutions to decay, he has managed their decay. The specific pattern of what is broken in Springfield and what functions relatively well maps directly onto what Burns needs to be broken and what he needs to function. The power plant runs, the regulatory oversight doesn't, the media exists but doesn't investigate the power plant, the medical establishment treats patients but doesn't study the environmental effects of the plant's emissions. The police maintain a minimal public order but don't challenge the economic arrangements that organize Springfield's power relationships. This is not incompetence. This is design. Springfield's broken institutions are Springfield functioning according to the design of the person with sufficient power to impose a design on them. The deaths that happen to the main characters are handled differently from the deaths of background figures, and the difference is instructive. When a main character faces genuine mortal threat, the show handles this with a specific kind of care. The threat is real within the episode. The emotional weight of the possibility is genuine, not played purely for laughs. The family's response to the threat conveys actual feeling rather than comedic approximation of feeling. The show is willing to be genuinely frightened for these people for the duration of the episode, and then they survive. Always. The main characters survive because the show requires them to survive, but the show has found ways to make this survival feel like something other than mere convention. The survival feels like the family refusing to lose something it loves, like the universe of the show refusing to let go of what it has built, like the dream refusing to give up the people it is dreaming about. Homer's brushes with death are the most frequent and the most various. He has been in hospitals. He has been in situations that, assessed by any realistic physical standard, should not be survivable. He has survived them all, and the show has developed a specific relationship with this survival that is its own kind of emotional texture. Homer's immortality is the immortality of someone who is loved, who is needed by the story, who has people waiting for him on a couch who would not be the same without him. It is not the engineered immortality of Burns, the technical and financial maintenance of a biological system against its natural decline. It is something else, something that the show never quite names, but that every surviving Homer episode communicates through the texture of the story. He survives because the alternative is too large to contemplate, not because death is impossible in Springfield, but because Homer's death specifically would require the story to acknowledge something the story is not ready to acknowledge. That the family on the couch is temporary, that the beer will eventually go flat, that the loop will eventually break. Homer survives because Bart needs his father, and Lisa needs her father, and Maggie needs her father, and Marge needs her husband, and the show needs its center, and the audience needs the man on the couch to be there when they come back on Sunday. He survives because we need him to. And in the end, that is the most honest thing the show has to say about death. Death in Springfield is real. It happens to people who are not Homer. It happens in Treehouse episodes to Homer too. But in the show's canonical continuous narrative, Homer does not die because the show has made a commitment to him and to his family and to the audience who has been watching them for 36 years. He does not die because the relationship between the show and its audience is not yet finished, because the couch is not yet empty, because the beer is still cold and the kids are still home and Marge is still in the kitchen and the television is still on. Homer does not die because Springfield is not done with him yet, and neither are we. The show will end someday. Everything ends. Even the floating timeline cannot float forever, and even collective denial eventually runs out of the energy required to maintain itself. One day, in a form that nobody can currently predict, and that the show's current creators may not be the ones who determine, The Simpsons will produce a final episode. The loop will land. The timeline will stop floating. Bart will still be 10 years old, because that is the only Bart the show knows how to make, but the show will be finished, and the family will exist only in memory and rerun, and the specific kind of cultural permanence that the longest-running animated show in American history has probably already secured. What will that ending look like? The show has gestured toward various possibilities across its run, without committing to any of them. Flash-forwards have shown us possible futures that are subsequently abandoned. Dream sequences have shown us possible endings that are subsequently revealed as not endings. The Treehouse of Horror has killed the family in various configurations without the show meaning any of them seriously. The real ending, when it arrives, will have to do something that the show has never done. It will have to commit. It will have to let the characters arrive somewhere rather than perpetually deferring arrival. It will have to say, this is where the loop lands. This is the place the family has been orbiting for 36 years. This is what all of it was moving toward. If the show earns its ending, which is the only standard that matters, it will end on the couch. It will end with the family together. It will end with something that rhymes with the first episode and contains within it the resonance of everything that happened in between. It will end with Homer home. Because that is the whole thing. The couch and the family and the beer and the television and the specific warmth of a house that has been full of loud, imperfect, deeply committed love for 36 years. That is what all of it was protecting. That is what the floating timeline was preserving. That is what the reset button was keeping available. The family on the couch, together. This is where they belong, and this is where they are. This has always been the whole thing. And now, wherever you are, whatever time it is there, in whatever room or bed or quiet corner of the world you have found to spend these hours in, that is where you should be too. Somewhere comfortable. Somewhere safe. Somewhere that is, for tonight, your version of 742 Evergreen Terrace. Sleep well. Springfield will be here in the morning. It always is. That is the whole point. Thank you for spending 4 hours in Springfield. If you made it here, Something about this was right for you tonight. Subscribe and we will do it again. The Simpsons will be on the couch, we will be here. And the night will be exactly as long as you need it to be. End of complete script. Section 13. The Simpsons and the American Dream: What Springfield Actually Believes. There is a phrase that has been attached to The Simpsons so often and so automatically that it has stopped being examined. Critics, journalists, academics, and casual viewers all reach for it when they are trying to explain what the show is doing. It is a satire of the American dream. This is accurate as far as it goes, but it does not go far enough. It does not quite capture the specific quality of the show's relationship with this particular mythology, which is something more complicated and more interesting than simple satire. The Simpsons does not simply mock the American dream. It takes it seriously. It examines it from multiple angles simultaneously. It mourns the gap between what the dream promises and what most people actually experience. It also, in its best moments, suggests that the gap does not entirely invalidate the promise, that something worth wanting is being described even by a mythology that the economic realities of American life cannot deliver to most of the people who have been raised to pursue it. The Simpsons is a show about people who believe in the American dream and live its consequences. The American dream, in its most distilled form, is this. In America, the circumstance of your birth does not determine the ceiling of your achievement. You can start with nothing, and through work and intelligence and character, arrive at a life that is materially better, more secure, more dignified than the life you began with. Your children can start from a better position than you did. Progress is possible. Improvement is available. The future can be better than the past. Homer Simpson was born into the specific circumstances that the show has documented. A family shaped by economic constraint and parental failure and the specific environmental conditions of Springfield. He grew up with a father who was present but not fully there, with a mother who was absent through forces beyond her control, with a community that provided neither the resources nor the cognitive protection from a contaminating environment that would have given him the best possible chance of becoming the best possible version of himself. And Homer works at the nuclear power plant. He has worked there his entire adult life. He earns a salary that the show has described at various points as adequate and inadequate in roughly equal measure, depending on the episode's needs. He lives in a house in Springfield, the town he grew up in circumstances that are not dramatically better than the circumstances he grew up in and are in some ways continuous with them. This is not a success story by the American dream's own metrics. Homer did not start with nothing and work his way to something substantially better. He stayed where he started, doing work that requires less of him than he might have been capable of under different circumstances, earning wages that reflect his negotiating position rather than his value, living in a town that has extracted from him, through contamination and compromise, and the specific gravity of Burns's economic dominance, what it could not have extracted from someone with more resources and more options. And yet, Homer is happy. This is the show's most persistent and most radical claim. Homer Simpson, by the American dream's own metrics of failure, or at best a very modest success, is a genuinely happy person. He loves his wife, he loves his children. He loves his beer, and his television, and his couch, and the specific texture of his daily existence with an uncomplicated directness that the show never mocks. It presents Homer's happiness as real, as valuable, as something that the dream's metrics cannot capture because its metrics are not measuring the right things. The show has been making this argument for 36 years. It has been showing you a person whose material circumstances are limited, whose professional achievement is modest, whose place in Springfield's social hierarchy is neither high nor particularly secure, and insisting that this person's happiness is genuine, that the love he has and the love that surrounds him is not a consolation prize for failing to achieve the dream's promised material outcomes, that it is its own thing, its own sufficient thing. This is either the most optimistic argument the show makes or the most disturbing, depending on how you hold it. Most optimistic because it suggests that happiness is genuinely available outside of material achievement, that the dream's version of the good life is not the only version. Most disturbing because it can be read as a justification for a system that keeps Homer exactly where it needs him to be. If Homer is happy at the power plant, if Homer's happiness is located in the domestic world rather than in the professional one, then Burns never has to worry about Homer becoming the kind of person who questions his situation. The show holds both readings simultaneously, without resolving the tension between them. Homer's happiness is real, and it is also convenient for the people who benefit from Homer staying where he is. Both of these things are true at the same time, and the show has never decided which one it wants to foreground. Lisa represents the American dream in its most aspirational form, and the show uses her to examine what happens to that aspiration in the specific environment of Springfield. Lisa wants more than Springfield can give her. She wants intellectual engagement at a level her school cannot provide. She wants artistic and political community of the kind that her family, despite loving her, does not have the vocabulary to offer. She wants her intelligence to be recognized and responded to in ways that would allow it to develop, rather than simply to be acknowledged and then managed as a social inconvenience. She is, in the terms that the American dream uses to describe its ideal beneficiary, exactly the kind of person the dream is supposed to work for. She is hardworking and intelligent and ethical and ambitious in the specific ways that the dream rewards. She is the child whose qualities should, according to the dream's logic, allow her to leave the circumstances she was born into and arrive somewhere that her abilities can be fully deployed. And the show has given her the flash-forward episodes to demonstrate where this aspiration leads. Lisa does leave Springfield, she does go to college, she does pursue the life that her qualities make possible. The future versions of Lisa that the show has shown, while provisional and non-canonical, consistently describe someone who has achieved the kind of life the dream promises and who is also, in specific and recognizable ways, not entirely at peace. The achievement costs something. The leaving costs something. The relationship between the person Lisa becomes in the dream's terms and the family she comes from and loves is complicated by the distance she has had to put between herself and Springfield to become that person. She has done what the dream asked, and the dream's terms, it turns out, did not fully account for what it would mean to leave. This is not a unique insight. Many stories have examined the specific grief of being the person in a family who moves into a different class and a different world, and discovers that movement creates as many kinds of loss as it resolves. What makes the Simpsons version interesting is the specific care it takes with both sides of the experience. It does not present Lisa's aspiration as misguided or her achievement as hollow. It also does not present the cost as a price well worth paying that should simply be accepted as part of the bargain. It holds both the achievement and the cost in the same frame and asks you to feel both at the same time. Springfield produced Lisa. It also limited her. The show does not resolve the relationship between those two facts. It sustains the tension and lets it be generative. Bart represents the American dream in its failure mode, not Homer's version of failure, which involves limitations that were imposed from outside and shaped Bart's father into someone whose potential was never fully available to him. Bart's version is more direct, more visible, more the subject of the show's explicit attention. Bart is failing school. He is failing the institutional pathway that the American dream uses to sort children into the categories that determine their adult possibilities. He is consistently unable or unwilling to perform at the level that the school requires, consistently in trouble with the authority structures that manage his daily existence, consistently oriented toward the present moment and its immediate satisfactions, rather than the future-oriented discipline that the dream's pathway requires. And the show has spent 36 years examining what this means, not judging it exactly. Though the show does not pretend that Bart's relationship with formal education is without consequences for his future possibilities, but not simply condemning it either. Because the show is also consistently interested in what Bart actually is, in the qualities that he has that the school's metrics cannot capture, in the ways that the category of failure that Bart occupies is a failure on the school's terms rather than on the terms of what a human being actually needs to be. Bart is creative. He is socially intelligent in ways that the show documents across many episodes, capable of reading situations and people and the interpersonal dynamics of groups with a fluency that exceeds most of the adults around him. He is brave in ways that sometimes tip over into recklessness, but that at their core reflect a genuine willingness to take risks and to bear consequences that many of his more academically successful peers do not possess. He is loyal. He is funny in a way that is genuine rather than performed. None of these qualities show up in the school's assessment of Bart. The school sees his failures and his violations and his refusal to perform the behaviors that the institution values. It does not see the things he is actually capable of, because it is not equipped to measure them. The American dream, through the school, is telling Bart that he is a failure. And the show, week after week for 36 years, has been showing you someone who is not quite captured by that assessment. Not without his genuine failures and limitations and the real costs of his relationship with institutional authority. But not reducible to failure either. Not a person who has nothing to offer beyond what the school has found and found wanting. The show is asking what it means when the dream's sorting mechanism produces a verdict and the verdict does not match what is actually there. Bart is the question the dream generates when its metrics meet a person who has not been shaped by the same forces the metrics were designed to measure. The American dream's relationship with Springfield is mediated, always, by Burns. He is the dream's dark version of itself. The person who started with wealth rather than with nothing and accumulated more of it, whose success is measured in the terms the dream values, and who has achieved what the dream describes as the summit of American possibility. He is the richest man in Springfield, the richest man in the region by some accounting, a billionaire of immense and seemingly unkillable wealth, who has been at the top of the available hierarchy for 100+ years. And he is, by almost every other measure, a failure of the human project. He has no genuine relationships. Smithers is devoted to him, but the devotion is complicated by the medical reality of what Smithers provides, and by the power imbalance that makes the authenticity of any feeling between them impossible to assess. He has no friends in any ordinary sense. He has employees and he has people he interacts with for specific purposes, and he has the population of Springfield below his hill, who exist in the economic orbit of his power. None of this constitutes the kinds of human connection that most people would list among the things they value most. He is also, despite his extraordinary wealth, in continuous medical peril. His survival requires weekly intervention. His body is a system that has been maintained past its natural function by the application of enough resources to override what nature would otherwise have decided. He is alive because he can afford to be. If his money disappeared tomorrow, he would die within the week. The dream says that wealth is the goal. Burns is the dream's most complete achievement in Springfield, the person who has accumulated the most wealth, and he is also the person whose existence most clearly demonstrates what the dream does not give you. He has everything the dream promises. He does not have the things the dream does not promise. And the things it does not promise, it turns out, are the things that most people actually want when they examine what they want. The show places Burns at the top of Springfield and Homer in the middle of it, and Bart failing through the bottom of it, and it uses the three of them to describe the full range of the dream's outcomes. What the dream's success looks like, what its ordinary outcome looks like, what its failure mode looks like, and in doing so, it suggests that the dream's metrics may be measuring the wrong things, or measuring real things wrongly, or accurately measuring things that are not the things most worth having. Springfield as a place is the American dream's geography. It is everywhere and nowhere, as we have established. It is any American town, all of them simultaneously, none of them specifically. And this geographic universality is the dream's geography too. The dream is not located in any specific place. It is available anywhere, in any Springfield, in any state, to anyone who meets the conditions it sets. The dream's promise is its placelessness, its claim to be available regardless of starting point. And Springfield demonstrates, across 36 years, what the dream's placelessness actually produces. It produces a town where the economic conditions that should enable the dream have been concentrated in the hands of a single person who uses them, not to expand the dream's availability, but to constrain it. Where the environmental conditions that should support a healthy population have been compromised by the same person's operation of a facility that he refuses to make safe because making it safe would cost him money, and making it safe would mean acknowledging the damage it has already done. Where the political conditions that should enable democratic accountability have been so thoroughly captured by economic interest that the accountability mechanisms exist on paper and not in practice. Springfield is the American dream's geography in the sense that it is everywhere. It is also the American dream's geography in the sense that it demonstrates what the dream produces when the conditions that would allow it to work as advertised are not present or have been actively compromised. The dream is real in Springfield. Homer believes in it genuinely, with the same uncomplicated directness he brings to his love for his family. He believes that work and family and the ordinary pleasures of the life he has built represent the dream's real content. And the show never tells him he is wrong about this. The show agrees with Homer that the beer and the couch and the family are the real content. But the show also shows you what is happening to the water. And It is a very strange and very specific kind of show that can hold both of those things at the same time and present them without resolving the tension between them, because the tension is the truth of the place and the truth of the people who live in it. Section 14. What we leave behind: the legacy of watching. You have spent 4 hours in Springfield tonight, or something close to 4 hours, depending on how the night has gone, whether you drifted and returned, whether you watched closely or let the words wash over you in the way this kind of watching is designed to accommodate. Either way, you have been somewhere specific and strange and quietly familiar, and now the night is at whatever point the night has reached, and the watching is at its end. What does it mean to have spent this time here? Not philosophically, in the abstract sense that asks what any human experience ultimately means. In the practical sense, what do you carry out of 4 hours in Springfield? What stays with you when you close the tab or set down the phone or let your eyes drift shut in whatever room you have made comfortable for this? Some of it is the material of the sections themselves, the background characters and their hidden depths, the music and what it has been saying underneath the jokes, the house and its shifting architecture, Burns and his hill and the power it represents, Marge and her unspoken language, the chalkboard and its catalog of unfilmed incidents, the treehouse and its annual truth-telling, Springfield's economy and who it serves, the couch and what it confesses every week, the secondary family and the roads not taken, the floating timeline and what it is protecting and who is doing the protecting, the relationship with death that the show maintains, carefully, across 36 years of continuous storytelling, the American dream and Springfield's particular version of it. You carry all of this in the form of impressions and fragments, the way television knowledge is carried, not as a set of organized facts, but as a texture, as a quality of attention that the material has generated in you. You have been looking at a show you thought you knew from a different set of angles than the ones you usually use, and the show looks different from these angles than it looks from the ones you are accustomed to. That difference is what the next episode you watch will carry. The next time you see Arnie Pie in a traffic shot, you might notice something about his elevation and his futility that you did not notice before. The next time the score makes one of its chromatic turns, you might hear it as deliberate rather than incidental. The next time Marge makes the groan, you might receive it as something more specific than a running gag. The next time Homer survives something that should not be survivable, you might feel the dream protecting its own, rather than simply watching a cartoon character bounce back from impossible physics. The show will not have changed. The show cannot change. It is what it is, accumulated across 36 seasons into a fixed body of text that the audience moves through, rather than something that moves through the audience in response to being watched. But your relationship with it will have shifted, in the small, durable way that new angles on familiar things always shift the relationship. The Simpsons has been described in so many ways by so many people over so long a period that the description itself has become a kind of category. It is The Simpsons. It is a noun that contains its own definition. You do not need to explain what The Simpsons is to almost anyone in the English-speaking world and to large portions of the non-English-speaking world. It simply is, in the way that very few cultural productions manage to simply be. This is what 36 years of continuous presence in the culture produces. Not just familiarity, but a kind of cultural foundational status, a sense that this thing has always been here and will always be here, that it belongs to the furniture of the world in the way that very few made things do. The Simpsons is more permanent than most things that human beings produce, more durable than most businesses, more continuous than most governments, more present than most institutions that were designed to endure. And it achieved this permanence by being, underneath all of its comedy and its satire and its formal experiment and its occasional darkness and its continuous innovation, about the most permanent thing there is, a family. The love between people who did not choose each other and who have chosen each other anyway, repeatedly, through every episode of chaos and failure and reset. The specific quality of the ordinary that becomes extraordinary when it is maintained across enough years, when enough shared experience accumulates between the people who are sharing it, when the house fills up with the particular smell of the particular life that has been lived inside it. The Simpsons is permanent, because what it is about is permanent. Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie are specific fictional people, but they are also containers for the most general human things. The love between parents and children. The love between people who have chosen to share a life. The specific joy and frustration of belonging to a family, of being unable to entirely escape the people you are most deeply connected to, and not quite wanting to escape them even when the wanting seems clearly available. These things do not become less true as time passes. They do not become less recognizable as the cultural context around them shifts. They do not require updating or revising to remain relevant, because they were never primarily about the culture or the moment. They were always about something underneath the culture and the moment. Something that the comedy and the satire and the formal experiment and the music and the architecture and the economy and the background characters and all the rest of it have been built around and in service of. The family on the couch, the ordinary life, the thing worth coming back to. It is, by now, late wherever you are, or early, depending on which side of the night you have spent these hours on, depending on whether you started this at the beginning of the night or whether you are arriving at its end after coming to it sometime in the small hours when sleep was not immediately available, and something quiet and familiar seemed like the right kind of company to keep. Either way, the night has been doing what nights do when you give them the right company. It has held you in its particular stillness while the words moved through the space around you. And Springfield did its thing in the background, and the family sat on the couch, and the beer stayed cold, and everything that the show has, maintained for 36 years, continued to be maintained. You have been in good company. However many other people are watching something like this tonight, in their own quiet rooms and their own different time zones, in whatever part of the world has The Simpsons playing while the night holds still around them, you have been among them. All of you in Springfield together, in the way that television creates communities of simultaneous experience, even when the members of those communities are nowhere near each other geographically. Springfield is real in this sense. It is the place you all came to tonight. The place that was here when you arrived and will be here when the night is done and you have moved into whatever comes next. The show will be on again. The family will be on the couch. The beer will be cold, and the chalkboard will have a new sentence, and the couch gag will do whatever the couch gag does, and the episode will be whatever the episode turns out to be. And Springfield will be exactly what Springfield always is, which is to say strange and familiar and impossible and entirely itself. You know this place. You have always known this place. Even when you discovered it for the first time, you recognized it, because it was built from materials you already had, from the shapes of ordinary life that you carried before the show existed, and that the show has simply organized into a specific form that you return to. The night is done, or nearly. The last thing to say is the simplest one. Thank you for being here. Sleep well. Springfield will be here in the morning, exactly as you left it. The family will be on the couch. The loop will still be floating. And Bart will still be 10 years old, chalk in hand, writing a sentence about something he almost certainly did not regret doing, waiting for the couch gag to begin. It always is. It always does. That is the whole point. That is the whole beautiful, impossible, 36-year-old point. If tonight was what you needed, subscribe and come back. We will be here. The Simpsons will be here. And the night will always be exactly as long as you need it to be. End. Section 15. The side characters who carry the most weight. There is a distinction between secondary characters and minor characters that The Simpsons has always understood more clearly than its audience. Secondary characters are the ones who have names and backstories and consistent personalities and recurring relationships with the main family. Minor characters are the ones who exist to fill a scene, to deliver a line, to populate a background or a crowd or a specific institutional setting. The show has built hundreds of characters in both categories across its run, and the distinction between them is not always where you would initially place it. Some characters who appear rarely are not minor at all. Some characters who appear frequently are doing less for the show's deepest projects than characters who show up in 3 episodes and then drift away, having done their specific work. The Simpsons has a talent for finding, in characters who arrive briefly, something that illuminates the show's central concerns more directly than the main characters can manage. Let's spend some time with a few of these. Lurleen Lumpkin appears in 1 episode in the show's 3rd season, country music is played here, and she is the show's most honest examination of what it would actually look like if Homer's flaws cost him his marriage. She is a country singer of genuine talent living in poverty when Homer discovers her. He becomes her manager. He develops feelings for her, or something adjacent to feelings. Some combination of genuine liking and the specific vulnerability that comes from being someone whose wife manages him with patience rather than adoration. Lurleen Lumpkin sees Homer differently from how Marge sees him, or at least presents herself as seeing him differently, and Homer, who spends most of his life being barely noticed by the man he works for and barely seen by the town he lives in, responds to being seen with a completeness that creates a genuine threat to his marriage. The episode does not resolve this with Homer simply choosing Marge in a moment of straightforward moral clarity. It resolves it with Homer doing the right thing and the right thing costing him something. Lurleen was real or felt real, in ways the episode neither dismisses nor entirely endorses. And what the episode is honest about, in a way that many shows would soften or avoid, is that the threat to the marriage came from something real about what the marriage does not give Homer. Not that the marriage is insufficient, or that Lurleen was right to pursue Homer, but that Homer's need to be truly seen, to be the object of genuine adoration rather than managed affection, is a real need. One that the marriage's structure sometimes leaves unfulfilled. Lurleen does not come back significantly after this, but she did her work. She showed you something about Homer and about the marriage that the regular texture of the show cannot quite show you, because the regular texture of the show is organized around maintaining the marriage rather than examining its stress. Points directly. Frank Grimes appears in one episode in the show's 8th season, Homer's Enemy, and does something that almost no other character in the show's run manages to do. He sees Springfield clearly and cannot survive the seeing. Frank Grimes is a man who has worked very hard for everything he has. He grew up without advantages. He developed his skills through effort and perseverance, and the specific determination of someone who understood that nothing would be given to him, and who made himself into someone whose abilities should earn him what he was willing to work for. He arrived at the nuclear power plant as a new employee, expecting the world to work in the way that he had learned it works. Competence is recognized, effort is rewarded, quality rises, and the people who have earned their positions through ability and work are the people who occupy those positions. And then he encountered Homer. Homer, who has not earned his position by any metric Frank can identify. Homer, who sleeps at his workstation, who creates crises that Frank has to resolve, who survives catastrophes that Frank cannot understand how anyone survives, who is adored by the community around him despite demonstrable incompetence at the job he is supposed to be performing. Homer, who has the wife and the house and the children, and the place in Springfield's social fabric that Frank's understanding of how the world works says should go to people like Frank, who work hard and develop their skills and take their responsibilities seriously. The episode follows Frank as he tries to address this dissonance through the mechanisms available to him. He reports Homer's incompetence. He attempts to have Homer held accountable. He tries to make the system work the way systems are supposed to work. And the system does not respond. The system has been organized around Homer in ways that Frank cannot penetrate because Frank does not understand that the system in Springfield is not organized around the principles Frank was raised to believe in. It is organized around the interests of Burns, for whom Homer's specific incompetence is a feature rather than a bug, and around the collective amnesia of Springfield, which has absorbed Homer's disasters without consequence for so long that incompetence and consequence have become disconnected. Frank Grimes goes mad. The show presents this as comedy, as the inevitable endpoint of a man who cannot accept the absurdity of his situation. But what Frank Grimes is experiencing, underneath the comedic frame, is the specific experience of someone who believed in the American dream's meritocratic promise and discovered that the promise does not operate in the specific environment he is in. The dream said that what you earn through effort is what you receive through the world's response to that effort. Frank earned a great deal. He received very little of what that should have bought him. And Homer, who has not earned by Frank's standards, has somehow received everything. Frank Grimes cannot survive the contradiction. The show kills him at the episode's end, in a moment that is played for comedy, but that lands as something considerably heavier than comedy if you have been following the episode's argument carefully. The show is saying that certain truths about the way the world works are not survivable if you encounter them directly and cannot find a way to absorb them through some protective mechanism. Springfield's protective mechanism is collective denial. Everyone else in Springfield has absorbed the contradiction between what the world says it rewards and what the world actually rewards through the same amnesia that absorbs everything else. Frank Grimes did not have access to that amnesia because Frank Grimes came from outside Springfield. He did not grow up breathing the air and drinking the water. He had not been shaped by the environment's specific effects on the residents' relationship with uncomfortable truths. He saw clearly, and the clarity killed him. This is the show's most direct statement about what happens when you look at Springfield without protection. Arnie Pye reports from above and is ignored. Frank analyses from within the scientific establishment and is dismissed. Frank Grimes encountered the system at ground level with no prior conditioning to its specific unreality and could not survive the encounter. The show did not bring Frank Grimes back. There is no Grimes recovery arc, no episode where he heals and finds his place in Springfield's ecology. He died of seeing Springfield clearly, and the show allowed his death to stand as the endpoint of his story. This is, in its way, the Simpsons' darkest episode. Not because of the content, which the show plays with a comedic lightness that prevents it from feeling like the dark thing it is, but because of what it says, which is that the truth about Springfield can destroy the people who see it. That the town's survival requires that most of its residents not see clearly what Frank Grimes saw. That the relationship between the show's hidden truth and the people who get close to it is genuinely dangerous. Frank Grimes knew, and knowing was fatal. Sideshow Bob is a recurring antagonist who appears in more episodes over more seasons than his category as villain would normally allow. He keeps returning. He keeps presenting new schemes and new contexts and new opportunities to do the thing he has been doing since his first appearance, which is attempt to harm Bart and fail in ways that are elaborately designed and completely thwarted. The joke on its surface is the Wile E. Coyote joke, the elaborate villain and the impervious child, the sophisticated plans that cannot overcome the specific resistant quality of the target. But Sideshow Bob is doing something more interesting than the Wile E. Coyote joke because Sideshow Bob is fully aware that he is in the joke. He is educated, sophisticated, articulate, capable of theatrical self-awareness that the show uses to produce comedy, but that also functions as genuine character complexity. He knows he keeps failing. He cannot entirely explain why he keeps failing. He returns because the obsession is stronger than the evidence that the obsession cannot be satisfied. There is a reading of Sideshow Bob in which he and Bart are necessary to each other in the way that all great antagonist pairs are necessary to each other. Bart without Sideshow Bob lacks a specific kind of adversarial engagement that sharpens him. Sideshow Bob without Bart lacks an organizing purpose that gives his considerable abilities direction. They are, in this reading, a system. Neither functions quite the same way without the other, and this is why the system perpetuates itself across decades of attempted resolution. Neither of them can end the story, because ending the story would end the relationship, and the relationship, however adversarial, is the thing that makes both of them fully themselves. The show has gestured toward this reading in episodes where Bob and Bart have unexpected moments of something that resembles mutual recognition. Moments where the adversarial structure drops briefly, and the two of them are simply two people who understand each other in the specific way that you understand someone you have been in a long and complicated relationship with, who has shaped you through opposition in ways that neither of you chose or fully endorses. These moments are played carefully. The show does not want to overcommit to a reading of Bob and Bart's relationship that would require them to resolve it, because resolution would end the dynamic. But it cannot entirely suppress the recognition that the dynamic contains something more than simple antagonism, something that makes the show and its characters return to it again and again across decades. Sideshow Mel is Sideshow Bob's replacement, hired by Krusty after Bob's imprisonment, and he is one of the show's most persistently overlooked background figures. He has a bone through his hair, he speaks in a theatrical baritone. He exists in the background of Krusty's set with a quality of dignified suffering that the show never entirely resolves into comedy. Mel is a trained actor of some accomplishment who is working as a clown sideshow assistant because of circumstances that the show has never fully explained. He has depths. He has training. He has, in certain episodes, demonstrated emotional range and intellectual capacity that place him well above the function he is fulfilling in Krusty's operation. He is another of Springfield's figures of capacity without adequate outlet, intelligence without the institutional support to deploy it meaningfully. He is also, in a way that is easy to overlook, the show's figure of genuine theatrical dignity. He approaches his role with a commitment and a craftsmanship that the role does not require, and that nobody around him particularly notices or rewards. He does the job as well as the job can possibly be done. Not because doing it well serves his interests, not because anyone is watching carefully enough to notice the quality of the doing, but because he appears to have an internal standard that operates independently of external recognition. In this sense, Mel is one of the most heroic figures in Springfield. doing the best possible version of a demeaning thing because the best possible version is what he is capable of, and his own standard requires it. Springfield does not reward this. Nobody in Springfield is particularly grateful for the quality that Mel brings to standing in the background of a children's television show with a bone through his hair, but he brings it anyway, every time. That is either a portrait of enormous dignity or an extremely dark joke about what the world does to dignity when it encounters it. Probably both. Nelson Muntz is Bart's bully and also, in the specific way the show has developed him across the years, one of Springfield's most genuinely affecting characters. Nelson's home life has been established as one of the most chaotic in the show's entire catalog. His mother is absent in ways the show has varied the specifics of, but maintained the essential fact of. His father has similarly drifted through the character's history, without settling into a stable presence. Nelson lives, for most of the show's run, in the specific condition of a child who is essentially raising himself, managing his own daily existence with the limited resources available to a 10-year-old who does not have reliable adult support. And Nelson is a bully. He bullies Milhouse. He bullies the other children who are available to be bullied. The show uses him as the immediate threat in the social ecology of Springfield Elementary, the figure around whom the other children organize their self-protective behaviors. He is the danger, the source of the specific fear that elementary school social life generates in children who are his victims. But the show has never let this be the only thing Nelson is. It has consistently complicated the bully character with material about Nelson's actual situation, about the specific conditions that produce someone who responds to the world around him with the posture of threat. The bullying is not unexplained by the show. It is, if you follow the material across enough episodes, almost comprehensible as a response to the specific experience of being Nelson Muntz in Springfield. Almost. The show has given Nelson moments of genuine tenderness that are consistently surprising within his established character. His relationship with Lisa, brief and complicated and ultimately not resolved in a way that is entirely satisfying to either of them, shows both characters at their best and most vulnerable. Lisa's willingness to see past the bully to the person underneath. Nelson's willingness to be seen, to drop the performance briefly, to exist in a relationship that asks something different from him than the school's social ecology requires. These moments do not change Nelson permanently. He returns to the bully role. The show's continuity requires it, and the character's situation does not change in ways that would make a permanent change possible. But the moments exist in the record. They showed you something. And the something they showed you is that underneath the performance of threat is a child who was given this performance as a survival strategy rather than choosing it, and who is sometimes capable of being something else in the presence of someone who is genuinely willing to encounter him as something else. Nelson Muntz is Springfield's most visible portrait of what poverty and parental absence and the specific conditions of emotional neglect produce in a child. And the show has maintained enough sympathy for him across 36 years that the portrait, while honest about the costs, does not reduce him to the category of pathology. He is more than his bullying. He knows he is more than his bullying. He just cannot sustain being more than his bullying in the environment Springfield provides. This has been a night of walking through Springfield's side streets and back alleys, looking at the figures who inhabit the margins of the show's frame, the buildings that organize its geography, the music that moves beneath its comedy, the economics that structure its social relations, the broken time that holds its people in amber. A night of taking the show seriously on terms it does not always claim for itself, finding the architecture beneath the jokes and the weight beneath the warmth. The show supports this kind of attention. It has been built to support it. 36 years of writers and directors and animators who cared about what they were making, who understood that they were doing something more than making jokes about a yellow cartoon family, who built the hidden structures because the hidden structures were worth building, because they make the show truer than it would be without them. The attention you bring is the final ingredient the show needs to complete what it has been building. The show made the structure. You provided the observation. The meaning that results from that exchange is not entirely in the show and not entirely in you. It is in the meeting between them, in the specific quality of engagement that 4 hours of careful attention produces. You will carry that quality out of tonight with you, into whatever tomorrow holds. And the next time you find yourself in Springfield, watching an episode you have seen before or one you have not yet encountered, the show will look slightly different. Not completely different. The jokes will still be the jokes. The characters will still be the characters. The couch will still be the couch, but you will see the architecture. You will hear the music doing its work beneath the comedy. You will notice when the score goes quiet and understand what the quiet means. You will watch Marge in the kitchen and receive what she is sending. You will see the house change shape and know why it changes. You will look up at Burns Manor and feel what Springfield feels looking up at it. You will carry the show differently now. And carrying it differently is what 36 years of watching something carefully finally produces. Springfield is yours. It always was. It just takes a certain quality of attention to fully claim it. Sleep well. The family will be on the couch when you come back. End of complete script. 40,000 plus words. Bonus section. The things Springfield never says out loud. There is a category of communication in The Simpsons that is distinct from all the hidden codes and embedded meanings we have spent this night exploring. It is not the music's subtext. It is not the architecture's argument. It is not the economy's revelation or the character's unspoken language. It is something more basic and more pervasive. The things that Springfield never says out loud because saying them out loud would require the town to acknowledge what it is. Springfield talks constantly. It is one of the loudest fictional towns in American entertainment. Homer talks, Bart talks, Lisa talks until the room stops listening. Kent Brockman talks to a camera for a living. Krusty talks to children who have been trained to laugh on cue. The town meeting scenes generate more spoken words per square foot than almost any other setting the show uses. Springfield is voluble. Springfield is never quiet unless it is being deliberately quiet, and it is almost never deliberately quiet. And yet there is an enormous silence at the center of all this speech, a silence organized around the things that would, if said, require the saying to be followed by action, by change, by the specific kind of reckoning that the town has decided, apparently by referendum, it cannot afford. Nobody says, the water is contaminated. Nobody says, the plant is making us sick. Nobody says, the man on the hill has been making decisions about our lives for longer than most of us have been alive, and those decisions have served his interests at a cost to ours that we have not been fully permitted to calculate. Nobody says, our children have 4 fingers, our fish have 3 eyes. And we have been told these are 2 unrelated facts when they are not 2 unrelated facts. Nobody says, the doctor who has known about the crayon in Homer's brain for decades and never removed it is operating in a community where the medical institution has interests that are not always identical to the interests of the patients it serves. These are the things that are not said. The silence around them is not incidental. It is not the silence of people who have not thought about these things. It is the silence of a community that has thought about them and has arrived at the collective understanding that the cost of saying them is higher than the cost of not saying them. A community that has organized its speech around everything except the specific things that would require the speech to generate consequences. The show says these things. It has been saying them for 36 years through every mechanism available to it, except direct statement. Through the music that descends when Burns makes a destructive decision, through the 3-eyed fish that swims in the river and is noticed and forgotten, through Arnie Pie circling above the contamination zone with a camera, reporting to a newsroom that does not listen, through Frank Grimes, who looked directly at what Springfield is and could not survive the looking. The show says what Springfield cannot say, and perhaps this is the most important function the show has performed across its long run. Not the comedy, which is also important. Not the social satire, which has shaped how Americans understand their own culture in ways that are hard to fully trace. The function of saying the thing that the community within the show cannot say. Of keeping the statement in the record. Of ensuring that the silence at the center of Springfield's speech is visible to everyone watching from outside, even when it is invisible to everyone living inside. 36 years of that statement. Hundreds of episodes of the silence being made visible. The fish with 3 eyes swimming in the river, season after season, while the town drinks the water and Homer eats his donuts and Burns sits on his hill, and the couch holds the family, and the television plays, and the loop continues. The show says it, Springfield hears it, Springfield nods, and Springfield continues. Because that is what Springfield does. What communities do. What all of us do. When the cost of saying the thing is higher than the cost of continuing to not say it, the show says it anyway, on our behalf, into the silence where we cannot quite go. That is what it has always been for. Sleep well. You have been listening tonight, and listening is the beginning. Thank you for 4 hours in Springfield. If tonight was exactly what you needed, subscribe, and we will see you on the next one. The family will be on the couch, Springfield will be waiting, and the silence will still have the show speaking into it. And a final thought. Springfield on Sunday night. There is something specific about Sunday nights and The Simpsons that has been part of the show's identity since the very beginning, and that nobody talks about very much because it is so embedded in the texture of the viewing experience that it feels like weather rather than design. The Simpsons is a Sunday show. It has been a Sunday show since 1989, broadcast in the 8 o'clock slot on Sunday evenings in the United States, and this placement has shaped the experience of watching it in ways that run deeper than programming logistics. Sunday night has a specific feeling in American life. It is the night that sits at the boundary between the freedom of the weekend and the obligations of the week ahead. It is the night when the weekend's permission starts to wind down, when the obligations of Monday morning begin to exert their gravity, when the specific feeling of Sunday afternoon giving way to Sunday evening gives way to the specific feeling of Sunday evening giving way to whatever Monday morning is going to require. It is, for many people, the loneliest part of the week. Not because they are literally alone, though some people are, because the temporal position of Sunday night is inherently one of endings. The weekend is ending. The permission is ending. The comfortable suspension of usual demands is ending, and what is coming toward you across the boundary of midnight is the week, with all its requirements and its specific pressures and its ordinary weight. And at 8 o'clock on Sunday nights, for 36 years, The Simpsons has been on. The Simpsons has been providing company at the loneliest hour of the week for 36 years. It has been doing what good company does at that specific kind of lonely. It has been present. It has been warm. It has been funny in ways that make the approaching obligations feel less heavy. It has been the thing that makes Sunday night feel inhabited rather than empty. This is not nothing. In the accounting of what a cultural institution does for the people who live alongside it, this is not a small thing. 36 years of Sunday nights made less lonely by the presence of a yellow family in a fictional town doing impossible things for 22 minutes before the credits rolled and the week resumed. The show knew it was doing this, in the way that good art knows what it is for, without necessarily being able to articulate it directly. It knew that the Sunday night slot was a specific kind of assignment, that the people watching at 8 o'clock were experiencing a specific kind of feeling, and it organized itself to meet that feeling where it was. Warmth when the week's approaching cold was starting to be felt, laughter when the specific gravity of Monday morning was beginning its pull, company when the particular Sunday loneliness was settling in. Homer's contentment is the show's gift to Sunday nights. His genuine satisfaction with his beer and his couch and his family and his ordinary life is the show's way of saying, this is enough. The thing you have, the ordinary thing, the beer and the family and the quiet of the house around you, is enough. Monday morning does not diminish it. The obligations are real, and they will arrive on schedule, and they will require what they always require. And none of that changes the fact that this, right now, the Sunday evening, the family, the show is enough. It has been enough for 36 years. The Simpsons ends each week, and the week begins and Springfield waits, exactly as it was, for the following Sunday. And the following Sunday comes, as Sundays do, and 8 o'clock arrives, and the music plays, and the clouds part, and Bart is at the chalkboard, and the family is on its way home, and Springfield is exactly where you left it. It is always where you left it. Whatever the week brought, whatever the week took away, however the days between Sundays accumulated their weight and made their demands and delivered their disappointments and produced their small and large surprises, Springfield waited. The house was there, the beer was cold, the couch was ready, and the family, always, arrived. That is what 36 years of Sunday nights look like, from inside the show and from outside it. A continuous offering of company at the time when company is most needed. A continuous refusal to let Sunday night be simply the end of the good part of the week. A continuous insistence that the ordinary life, the beer and the family and the house and the town is worth inhabiting fully and watching carefully and returning to, week after week, for as long as the show continues and perhaps for as long after as the memory of it holds. You are watching this now, wherever you are and whatever time it is. The specific time does not matter as much as the fact of watching. The fact of choosing to spend this particular set of hours in Springfield's company, letting the town's strange and familiar and impossible texture wash over you in whatever way the night makes available. And Springfield, as it always does, as it has always done for the people who come to it with whatever they are carrying that particular night, is here. The family is on the couch. The beer is cold. The loop is floating. Good night. A note on watching this way. There is a specific kind of watching that this type of content exists for, and it is worth naming before we fully close. It is the watching you do when sleep is near but not quite there yet. When the room has gone quiet and the day has wound down, and there is nothing left to do but wait for the transition from wakefulness to sleep that comes in its own time and cannot be forced. The watching that you do with your eyes half open, tracking something that is interesting enough to engage with loosely but not demanding enough to require full attention, something that rewards being drifted away from and returned to, something that is still coherent when you come back to it, even if you missed a paragraph or a section while you were somewhere between here and sleep. The Simpsons was made for many things. It was made to make people laugh. It was made to satirize American culture and institutions. It was made to tell stories about a family and a town that somehow became as real as any family or town in fiction has ever been. It was made to last, and it has lasted. But it was also made for this, for the half-awake watching, for the comfortable familiarity of returning to something you already know, for the pleasure of letting something you love be present in the room without having to fully process it, for the specific comfort of Springfield at the edge of sleep, where the jokes are warm and the family is on the couch and the town is exactly what it always has been, and everything is, for the duration of the dream, fine. The hidden secrets and the buried theories and the elaborate architectural analysis we have spent this night exploring, all of that is real and all of it is there waiting whenever you want to look at it directly, with your full attention and the bright light of examination on it. But it is also, all of it, part of the texture that makes Springfield the right place to spend the hours when sleep is coming but has not quite arrived. Part of what makes the show feel like it has more to it than any individual watching can fully exhaust. Part of what makes coming back to it, again and again, across years and decades and whatever stages of your life you have been in when you returned, feel like returning to something that always has more to give than you took from it the last time. This has been 4 hours in Springfield's company. More than 4 hours, if you have been here since the beginning. The right amount of time, if this is where you are in the night. The beginning of something longer, if this is where you came in and the rest is ahead of you. However long it has been, welcome, and thank you, and good night. The couch is still there, the family is still on it, Springfield is still exactly where you left it. It always will be.